As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
One of the worst performances of my career, and they never doubted it for a second.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength, makes us noble.
You just gotta keep living, man. Livin.
Son of a bitch. Stole my life.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Denis Villeneuve has officially made the 2024 Oscar race the all-time boringest Oscars ever because he has just dropped a generational epic in Dune Part 2. This is possibly the Empire Strikes Back of our time. This is truly a blessing that we were able to experience a film of this scope and scale with so much craftsmanship on every level. And pretty much everyone who's seen the film has had the same reaction, describing the film as leaving them speechless without really knowing how to put their thoughts into words with this film. And I really do think that is the perfect description. I felt absolutely speechless when I first saw this. If you've watched our other episodes, you know we had an insane amount of anticipation for this film. Our expectations were through the roof high, and somehow Denis exceeded them. I mean, there was not a doubt in my mind that this was going to be the best film of the year and one of the best films of the decade. And of course, Denis delivered with some of his insanely talented collaborators, such as Greig, Fraser, and Hans Zimmer, who all of which we have a ton of praise for throughout this episode. But what we plan on doing over throughout this episode is letting you know why this film left you speechless. And some of you at home might not know how to put this film into words, but we've all seen this film, 4+ times now. We've done a lot of in-depth looking at it to try and pinpoint what it is that makes this film feel so unique, and why this film is difficult for most audiences to put into words. What makes it such a special cinematic experience compared to a lot of the other big scale films that we've seen over the last couple of years, and why this is truly a generational epic. And it's just so great to see Denis Villeneuve live out his childhood dream, because there was not a doubt in my mind that this would be the epic that we thought it would be, because this is a project Denis been making in his head since he was a teenager. Him and Hans Zimmer both have such passion for this book, and I think when you combine talented artists with skill sets like Denis and Hans, and you then give them a project that they've been creating in their head and have so much passion for on this level, there's just no way that it leaves you with anything other than something of this quality. And so, yeah, we're going to get into why this film left you speechless and why it had the impact on you that it did. So, Oscar, what were your thoughts on Dune Part 2 as someone who's read the book?
Yeah, so I'm a massive, massive, massive fan of the book, and I adore Part 1, and I've been so excited for this. And then obviously strikes and delays came around, and we were meant to have this last year. I'm kind of glad we didn't, because I feel like it would have been a bit swept aside in a award season, honestly. But yeah, this is such an incredible experience. Like Alex said, I've seen this 4 times now, and just the level of kind of scale that we see on this is just insane. Like the way they're moving forward, like the boundaries of filmmaking, is just insanity. For me, this is like 95% a perfect film. We kind of see like we see our characters move forward and everything, like the religion and politics is kind of furthered in this, and it gets deeper, and I think that's handled really, really well. My one problem, I think it needs to be longer. I'm just going to say that there. I have a couple issues with the final edit. That's holding it back slightly for me, but we'll get into that later. So for me, Part 1 is, I hold that slightly high because I feel it flows better. But this is still an unbelievable film on unbelievable scale and magnitude, and just the way, even with Greig Fraser, we thought he'd seen it. We thought we'd seen it all from him, but then he comes out with this. So for me, this currently sits at a very high 4.5 out of 5.
Yeah, I'm kind of at the same point as you. I've been in full Dune mode this past week. I've also seen it 4 times. Just constantly thinking about both movies non-stop. I think we all have a lot of praise about Dune 2 particularly. A lot of hype around just everybody going to see the movies. It's exciting time just seeing everybody, or movie cinemas like packed and everybody excited to go see new cinema or new movies. But yeah, I think Denis has done it again. He's created another all-timer science fiction movie, another all-time blockbuster movie, and I think it lived up to at least most of my expectations. Done one setup and set him up quite perfectly with a solid foundation for part two, and I think most of it did elevate everything. It's a much larger scale. There's a lot more story. There's more action. It's a much bigger film. A lot to digest. It took several watches to really digest everything that Denis does in this film. And after that first watch, I was convinced that this was better than part one. Um, since then, there's been a few cracks, like Oscar said, that I found in it. So it's not like the most completely perfect film, but what movie it is. So yeah, it's a big film. It's a lot lot to digest. I'm not really sure which part I prefer personally either. I'm not like say on each side. Um, I have them both as a like very high 4.5. And one of my favorite movies of all time. So I don't have like one of them big or much better than the other. I know a lot of people are saying that part two is better than part one. I don't get that. I think they are very different films, but they're both really great in their own way. Like Oscar said, like I think a lot of this is pretty perfect, and it is just that like kind of third act and pacing that kind of puts me off a bit towards the end of the film. But yeah, just still, I don't think anything's stopping this year. It's one of the best films of the decade, personally for me. It's just an insane blockbuster film. I think I would have preferred that longer runtime. Like Denis says, all the kids are wanting longer or 3 hour movies. So why did you not give us that 3 hour movie? Even 3 hours 20. Just go on and on. Like I just give us that full movie. But yeah, that's a few problems, but it's amazing. Yeah, regardless, it's a ridiculously great film. Technically, Greg Fraser's at the top of his game. Denis at the top of his game, and yeah, I'm excited to finally dive deep into what's so great about this film.
Yeah, I'll just get the few criticisms I have out of the way since both of you kind of touched on them. And the first is that this should not be a 3 hour movie. This should be a 3.5 hour movie. This is it, he talks. This is the epic of I called Denis the David Lean of our time. The way he's able to make big scale films with flawed characters. And, like, you're trying to make an epic on the size of Lawrence of Arabia, and traditionally, an epic is supposed to be a 3 hour movie. This feels epic enough that it still is an epic without being 3 hours. But, like, we literally just saw Oppenheimer and Avatar make billions with 3 hour plus runtimes. Like, you can make a 3 hour plus runtime movie and still make billions and still make an enjoyable movie. So, and there are parts that do feel a little rushed and overcut, so I don't know why he did that. Well, I do know why. And actually, I think I know exactly who it is to blame for 3 hours. Do either of you know whose fault
The
this is?
the audience from part one.
Hmm.
Partially right, but there's actually someone else who's to blame for the audience reaction. COVID and
And
HBO.
Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
And the reason is because it's we're still feeling the effects of COVID here with this movie because they did that stupid thing. Whoever that executive was should be fired. Where they put same day streaming and theater release, and Dune was affected by that. So now a bunch of people watched this cinematic, made for the theater movie where the sound mix is meant to be experienced on surround sound speakers, and now is compressed into TV audio, and then they see it at home. They call it boring. So Denis hears all this stuff about pacing problems and the film being boring. So I think because of that, he even said in an interview that he listened to the criticisms of Dune 1 and tried to adjust for Dune 2. And I think that because of that, he was very worried about having scenes that would slow the pacing down and maybe make the audiences feel a little bored. And I
It's
think he
annoying
had
though. I feel like I wish he would be more confident in like his own filmmaking, and
Yeah,
I don't
I
know.
agree.
It kind of feels like a Two Towers rather than it should be feeling like a Return of the King, where you do get that like 3 hours 20 epic.
Yeah,
Um,
I just prefer the feel of part one. It feels like part one took its time with everything, and it feels it had more care to it, which is weird because even Denise said that he thinks part one had a he thinks he didn't do that well with part one. He thought he was a lot happier with part two, but I know he's kind of said in interviews that he wanted to kind of tailor this a bit more, and I think, like you said, they heard from the reactions in part one, but is a bit annoying, to be honest, because I think what part one had going for it in that kind of terms of like feel, and I thought that had a perfect run time, and the final edit of part one I really really loved. It's just a shame that it didn't necessarily carry over to this one.
Yeah, he would have had final edit on this though, so it's not like a case where you can blame the studio or something like it is on
Yeah,
any
true.
unit editor.
No, yeah, like you said, I wish that he'd been a little more confident in, pushing for that 3-hour runtime and like knowing that you're giving audiences some of the greatest spectacle and action they've ever seen and trusting that they'll then, even though the ones who don't want to see the slower scenes will forgive it because of that. Because he really could have, and I wish that he had pushed for, really 3 hour and a half runtime, which this film easily could have been. And yeah, that's really my only major criticism is that I think the film should be longer, and everyone is left the theater wanting more. It's a completely different film from part one. Like the tone is different, the entire visual style is different. The score is actually very different, even though a couple recurring pieces of music come back. It's a very different score. It's different worlds and set design. Like we're in very different worlds from it, so it doesn't look or feel like part one really at all. Like we talked about how we thought like the score was going to be mostly building off of part one, and it really took a totally just new direction with set design, lighting, everything, and it feels like a completely different movie from part one, which a lot of that I like. I like how he kind of took a very fresh direction with it, but yeah, I mean, I think there are things that he changed from part one that improved, and I think maybe listening to the audience on the pacing wasn't the best. I mean, I'm sure in some scenes it made it better, but I do wish that he had pushed for a longer runtime here, which is really my only major criticism about the film. So, other than that, I think that if Dune Part One got a proper theatrical release rather than the same day as streaming, we'd be looking at a very different film with this.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I don't want to be too negative because like I do love this film. I mean, it's like for my top 50 still. It's like it's still a ridiculous film. I don't want to be too negative about everything, but it's just when it isn't completely perfect, it's just a bit frustrating, especially when the expectations going in were like different level.
Yeah, I
Actually,
can be.
sorry, we're saying.
Yeah, you go.
I was just going to say that this kind of brings up a conversation. I actually asked this question the other day, and that is that this, as we've just acknowledged, there are some flaws in the film. However, this film left me with one of the most speechless reactions, one of the most inspiring, memorable cinematic experiences of my life. There were so many things that this film did that just were like as someone who see we've the three of us have seen thousands of movies, literally. We watched an insanely abnormal amount of movies. And this film left me like truly like things I'd never seen film do. It reshaped my perspective on film, inspired me to a level I can't explain, and gave me just a film that on four watches, I'm still leaving the theater like with like a kid seeing, Star Wars for the first time. And it was just such a generationally impactful cinematic experience on an emotional level that's hard to put into words. So even though for me there are some flaws, like that is still I am not gonna knock the movie out of 5 star that did that effect for me just because of a couple flaws. So I think it does open up a conversation because I'm not sure both of you whether you agree or disagree with me on this, but I personally believe that is it more important for a movie to have because you look at a film like The Shawshank Redemption, that's a flawless movie. Like there are no flaws in the movie, but I don't think it has near the highs of Dune 2. Like I think Dune 2 does so many creative, innovative things, and it left me with such a stronger emotional impact. Even though there are like maybe a few little things that I think were not perfect. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Is it more important for a movie to have the highest highs or to have the fewest flaws? I personally am on the highest high side, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think. And also, please let us know in the comments below what you think is you would prefer a film with the highest highs or the fewest flaws.
It's a really difficult thing to discuss, honestly, because it just depends on like how many flaws, I guess. But for me, when I give something a 5 out of 5, I'm looking for perfection. I give something a 5 out of 5 because I don't see any flaws in it. So for me, I'm gonna go with like the flawless thing over the high of highs, because if something's flawless and it's got like consistent highs, and I kind of comparing this one to part one, I kind of maybe this is where I stand. For me, like part one is just perfection throughout. I would say my favorite sequence over the two probably comes from part two, but it's yeah, I just part one is just that kind of thing for me. But I think it's difficult to compare it to like something like Shawshank Redemption because they're completely different things. But they're both
Yeah,
film at the end of the day. But yeah,
yeah, it's really hard to compare the films,
it
Yeah,
is.
especially when it's
real
something
quick.
on this scale.
It was just the first film that popped into my head that's like a flawless movie. I agree,
Yeah,
like they're difficult films to compare. I was more just using that as an example of the fact that like Shawshank is a film that is like flawless, but at the same time, like it's I would guess I would call it safer. Like it's a safer movie than Dune 2, where Dune 2 is very highly ambitious and takes a lot of risks. So Shawshank was just the first film that popped in my head that like doesn't necessarily have flaws, but that's just
yeah,
why
I get what you
I
meant.
agree it's tough to compare normally.
Yeah, the experience was really why I gave it like a 5. Well, I gave it a 5 on the first 3 watches. It wasn't until the 4th that I kinda, like,
Yeah, same.
accepted that it wasn't. But yeah, it was just like you were saying, like, it is, like, the scale and, like, the moments that happen are, like, ridiculous, and you can't really compare them to many other films.
Yeah,
That's why it's created so special. Like, this was, like, my first midnight screening, and the, like, Dune 1 and Dune Part 2 back to back, like, it will be, like, a experience that, like, I won't forget. So, like, it is such a special film. Like, with Greg Fraser, particularly, like, that's, like, now, like, 3 of his films are just, like, all-timer, like, cinema experiences at this point. So yeah, I really do love the film. It's more just me. I'm a bit OCD with my like 5-star like stupid letterbox ratings. So it doesn't really like mean like too much. It's like in my top 50. So it's still like
mm,
I still think it's like one of my favorite films of all time.
mm,
Um, like Oscar was saying, it's just like being stupid with the 5 stars. But yeah, it's just it maybe doesn't help seeing it 4 times in 3 day or 4 days or whatever it was.
yeah.
That probably
Yeah, we
affects it as
we've all
well
seen the
because
film 4 times for anyone who's watched it at home, and it's only been out for 4 days.
yeah,
Um, I just kind of got like headaches and like feel like I had something like an itch to scratch or something with like seeing it more because I was like I just had that thing at the back of my head like I know this something is off like as I kind of watched it more I just want to like pinpoint my things on it. And yeah, I guess with the flawlessness like compared to part one, I wish, like with the editing and the edit that I talked about, I just want to get a couple negatives out of the way before we flood it with positives. Just because, yeah, I'll just dump it all here. I just wish we held on to like some sequences and some shots for a bit longer, which I feel like it's weird because they're both edited by the same person. I think the editing in part one is better because we hold on to those moments longer, and it feels like we're going from place to place and I guess part two has like loads of stunning sequences, but I feel like I'm more wowed by part one um, overall from kind of my perspective. I just feel like it was just missing the connection between scenes to carry kind of my emotions through, particularly in that last act. But like you guys have said, it's kind of it's not like a massive thing because like what we see and what's there is truly unbelievable. It's just kind of the things that we don't see is what's bothering me. And that's not necessarily the changes they made from the book. Um, it's just kind of film aspects, I guess. But yeah, we'll move on.
Yeah, I do agree with all the criticisms both of you are saying. I guess for me, it's just the fact that like when I saw this film, I said I'm literally gonna watch this movie every day till I can figure out how to make something this good. And you know that's a reaction you only get from a handful of films. So for me, I think that the highs are enough to overlook its flaws. But I think at the end of the day, we all love this film and have much more appreciation for it than we do criticism. So now we kind of got that out of the way, and we can start talking about the most the star of the film. And the star of the film is not Timothée Chalamet. The star of the film is not Zendaya. The star of the film is Greig fucking Fraser. Greg Fraser. Every time I talked about that stroke of inspiration this film gave me, every time I walk into a Greg Fraser film, I walk out and think about cinematography differently. And I cannot name another DP who has reshaped my perspective of cinematography like Greg Fraser. Literally, when I saw the Batman, I was preparing to shoot a short film, and I walked out. It was a week before I was going to shoot the film, and I literally walked out of the theater and called the DP I work with, and I was like, "We got to change the visual style." I'm like, I got like changed the whole visual style, and then I walked out of Dune 2 and did the same exact thing. I'm changing the entire visual style for my next film now, and the DP I work with agreed on both the Batman and Dune 2. And I saw Dune 1, and I was very impressed with the cinematography. I was like blown away. Deserved that Oscar, absolutely. Like best of the year, incredible. The Batman, I'm like, I said in our Dune 1 episode, I'm like, how is this guy going to top the Batman? Like he did Rogue One. He touch on what he did there in a second, but he did Rogue One. Very impressive cinematography, like one of the best shot Star Wars films. Then he does Dune, which is just on another level from Rogue One. Then he does the Batman, which is like, and he does the Batman. I'm like, all right, like this has to be the peak of where this guy can go. And I'm also thinking in my head, like the aesthetic of the Batman with the colors it's able to use and the neo noir lighting. I'm like, the world of Dune just being in the desert, like, can you really achieve that same sense of beauty? Like, even if it's that same technical precision, like, can he achieve that same sense of beauty that you can in the Batman? And then he just drops Dune 2, and I'm like, yeah, like it's like, what is this guy not capable of? Because he and really what he does is he kind of does to Dune what he did to Batman and Rogue One, where he tightens the frame. He really brings long telephoto lenses to to cinema in such a fresh way, where he uses lenses tight. For those you don't know, wide lenses expand space, long lenses tighten them, and Greg Fraser tightens the frame. And if you look at traditionally, like old Hollywood, even through like the 20th century up until now, the long tight lenses are really reserved for close-ups and shoulder up shots. And Greg Fraser just using them with like full body long shots and using like insanely long lenses where you can only use a lens that tight from a very far distance away. Like if you're in this room I'm in right now, I can never use it and even shoot a close up because it's just not big enough. So you need an insane amount of space to pull off these insanely tight lenses that Greg Fraser does. And he's really just in every film just reinventing the way using long lenses, using the depth and out of focus images and drawing your eye to things that are not in focus in a way that's just so fresh and new and really I think this is such a big part of why people are saying like they've never seen anything like Dune 2 because Greg Fraser's the way he uses tight lenses is really very unconventional for what other filmmakers are doing. Like most filmmakers are going to see the desert, this big, vast landscape, and the first thing they're going to do, 99 out of 100 filmmakers or DPs are going to get the widest lens and showcase that wide, vast landscape. And Greg Fraser does the opposite. He tightens that frame. Like Star Wars was always people call Star Wars spectacle, which it is. It's almost all wide spectacle. You're only going to see a tight lens in Star Wars when it's a close up or something like that. And that's what he does with Rogue One. He brings those long, tighter lenses to Star Wars and gives that franchise a fresh look. And in Dune, he just takes it to another degree where this epic spectacle like Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence of Arabia is a wide lens scale film. And he just tightens the frame and makes it such an intimate story. And like I always say with Denis Villeneuve, his trademark style is his intensity. A Denis Villeneuve film is normally an intense experience. And long lenses, I think, are much more intense than wide lenses. And Greg Fraser just uses them and tightens the frame to such he tightens it for such perfect intensity, perfect intimacy with the characters, and really in this gigantic landscape, uses the depth more than the width. So that's just so much. I could literally just do a whole podcast just talking about. We could all do a whole podcast just talking about Greg Fraser because he's the MVP of this film in my opinion. And it literally when I'm 10 minutes into the film, I'm just not even 5 minutes into the film. I'm just like Greg Fraser. Holy shit! Like all I'm thinking about is I'm immersed in the story and what's going on, but I'm also like this dude is just on another level. Like it's crazy to group him in with Roger Deakins because Roger Deakins has been pumping out some of the most beautifully shot films for decades now. Greg Fraser's really only been in the scene for around 10 years on a major level, a little over 10 years. Like he shot Zero Dark 30 in 2012. I believe that was the first major one he did. But he doesn't have this long filmography and list of credits yet. Like he's in a young career. And I think, how do you not say he's in the conversation with Roger Deakins? Like I'm a big believer in, letting people prove themselves over time versus, someone who's new and like just let them give them the time to prove themselves. But like look what he's done in such a short span of films. It's insane. I'm just like I said, like the opening scenes, I'm just like this, like how the fuck does he keep doing this shit?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's we kind of see, particularly in the beginning, because we open after kind of small introductions, we open on the orange eclipse, which looks so cool. Obviously, kind of
It's ridiculous.
reminiscent of that sequence in Blade Runner 2049 in Vegas, that orange. But yeah, it's just unbelievable what he's able to achieve, and just some of the shots on there where we see the Harkonnens like floating up that mountain, and then we just get some massive wide landscape shots that are just, the scale is incredible, and they just look so minuscule. But yeah, kind of like, I guess like the range of colors is wider than what we see in part one, like, and we see it straight away. And then probably my favorite sequence in the entire film, the thermal cameras used for the black sun on Gady Prime, and every time I notice it, it makes me so happy. Like the transition from like the normal color to the thermal cameras in one shot that happens in those sequences is absolutely unbelievable, and it's done so well and so smoothly. That entire sequence just makes me so happy watching it. And it's so cool that they use that as kind of, because the thermal cameras as like a natural light, because that's the black sun is that source of natural light on the Harkonnen homeworld. And like I said about the opening, those kind of wide shots of the arena that we see, they're so good, man. And that kind of the opening shot where we see that Austin Butler entrance in the arena, and that kind of gates open and the shadow kind of opens on his face, is so good. A lot of criticism I've been seeing online of Denis is his use of shallow focus, which is a big thing because he uses it a ton in this film. He just loves to blur out the background of his shots quite heavily. I think it works well for the majority, because I think for the times, I think it works well when you're kind of like dividing our characters, because there's a lot of sequences in this where there's a lot of conflict with characters within the Fremen. And I think it works well then as kind of a visual storytelling piece. I do think at times it does become a bit heavy-handed and slightly overused. But for the most part, this is just visually just absolute insanity. And we get to kind of the final battle, and something that I wish was longer. But what we do see, we kind of one of my favorite shots is kind of, you get the horizontal split of like the worm moving across this side of the shot, and like you got the ornithopters moving the other way, and like the frame is kind of, it's almost rotating, and we see it like a clip of it in the trailer. And I think that's just, it's done so well. But yeah, I also think that I liked the differences with the way they used like the visions in here, because obviously in part one we see the kind of, they use the yellow a lot for that, and they differ here because we see it's difficult to describe, but it's very visually.
It's like a glow from like the middle of the screen. Like, don't know how to explain it other than that.
Yeah,
it's a light flare coming from the top.
Yeah,
Honestly, my light's kind of coming down.
That flare. I think I preferred the way they did the dream sequences in part one. I'm not sure if I love that flare coming across the screen, as I generally think I just preferred the harder cuts to the dream sequences in, like they did in part one. But like I said, like visuals of that kind of one main dream sequence that we see in the film, where we kind of got that kind of warm, kind of brownish lighting as we see Lady Jessica move through those kind of starving bodies.
The visions were quite different. I don't know. It's hard because part one you had the big contrast whenever you would go to a vision. It would be in the IMAX aspect ratio, so it'd be a big change. And whenever you switch over to it, and a lot of this being shot already in IMAX, a lot of it is. You don't have that instant like kind of reaction to completely being very different to the rest of the film. So
Yeah.
they're kind of like hard to make them stand out just from that. But yeah, the like Alex was saying, like the deserts, like we were talking about it in our part one video, that it's like Lawrence of Arabia, but this really is like deserts has never been captured at this like scale and beauty like since Lawrence of Arabia. It's insane. Like there's so many shots where it's just so full. One of my favorite ones was when it's Channy and Paul when they're sitting and it pans up, like the desert's already like filling the complete screen, and it pans up and you just see the horizon of the desert in the distance. Just everything about like the desert is just ridiculous. Just the amount of sand dunes, like a lot. The film does spend a lot more time in the desert, so there's a lot more chances for them to kind of show off the deserts and the actual like, sets being shot on location. It's completely different to the first one. I mean, that does create a lot of the different feels because you're not constantly switching between space and the Harkonnens and Caladan. So that does play into the kind of different feel just from between the films. Just the lighting, like the start, like you were saying, when the sunset's going down, it's so orange and like that tinge, very 2049, like you were saying, like it's such a great start to the film. It's just that classic like Dune score like comes in when they're like floating up, and how like the left hand of the screen is just the mountain, and then in the distance on the right you've got the desert showing off and the sun. It's such an insane shot at the start. The whole first sequence is just so good, with the Harkonnen soldiers attacking them and then getting shot from the distance, and it pans out. There's a big wide shot in the desert where it's just the rock in the middle. Oh, that whole first sequence is so good. And it really stands out just compared to like everything else in Dune because of the sunset. It kind of felt like a reaction to people saying the deserts and stuff were all very cold and kind of boring or whatever people would say. Because there's so much color and warmth and stuff just from the start. So I kind of felt like there was an instant reaction just from part one with that scene just at the start. Um, I love close-ups compared to part one as well. Like you were saying, I think Denis does love that shallow focus, and that is used a lot mainly to. It does work as like because he likes to do it during like dialogue scenes, so it does really put a lot of emphasis on like the characters talking. So it does work, but you would there isn't a lot of focus on like what's behind them when they're talking a lot, and because of how many dialogue scenes like that there is, it's a bit annoying at times, but yeah, it's not really a big deal. It's a thing that Denis does a lot in a lot of his films, so it's kind of expected. Um, but yeah, all the desert shots, amazing. Giddy Prime, insane. That whole sequence of the film is maybe my favorite of the film. It's just so different, like that, like the sun you were saying, the transition from inside to outside, the characters' faces are like so white in those scenes, especially the Baron because he's so high up in that arena, so the sun's like right in his face. And honestly, the first time I watched it, I didn't even actually realize it was because of the sun. I just thought it was like a stylistic choice of being in black and white. I didn't actually connect the light being that, so I was a bit confused why his face was so like so saturated. Like I was a bit confused at that first, but yeah, it's such a good choice. It really makes like that whole section just completely stand out. The arena, just the shapes and scales just speak for themselves. So, like the shots are ridiculous.
Austin
And
Butler's his shield, the color of the shield, like the black, it looks so
yeah,
cool when it
his
moves.
mouth as well. It's like so dark.
It is so looks, and it's like even like with the transition from the color in the film. There's like one shot where you've got Lea Seydoux character, Lady Margot Feminine. She's in like the foreground of the shot. That's in thermal, and then you've got like a background with some some people walking through a door, and that's in color. So there's I think there's one shot where half of it is in thermal and half of it is in color, and it looks so cool. But like I
Yeah, I
mentioned
think there's
earlier,
3 of those, I'm pretty sure. I think there's 3 shots where there's, like, a hybrid.
that's so cool. But like I
Yeah,
said,
there's a shot when the
earlier,
Baron is moving and he like starts off
oh
as
yeah, there is,
normal.
yeah.
And
Just
Austin Butler too, there's one from behind where he's in color, and then the light spreads open, and it's black and white.
oh yeah. I just wish they held on to some of those some of the shots for a little bit longer, especially because we get like bits in the opening when the Harkins are on top of the rock, and they like zoom in on the thumper, and one of them snipes it out, and we get this
Mhm.
unreal shot where you can see the laser, and it's the massive wide angle shot, and that I just wish like parts of that were longer, and like the editing wasn't cutting away from it as quick enough. And also the bit after that, we see Lady Jessica smash the rock on the guy's head. That is one of
Ridiculous
the
shot.
best shots of the film.
Such a great shot.
My one complaint about that sequence is I think there's too many edit points in that like small sequence, because we kind of see it from different kind of sides, and we kind of get in and out. I just wish it would hold on kind of one of that shot when she's doing that, rather than having like a couple kind of shots on it. But the with like the eclipse sung at the top right of the frame, it looks absolutely stunning, and I love those kind of silhouettes that Denis uses. Going with
Yeah.
that as well.
When they
But
fall
yeah,
off the rock as well, and he's falling, and it just cuts to when one of them's falling, and it's just the rock on the side on the screen, and just him falling on the left. That's such a great shot.
it is like when I first watched it, it's like pointing up, and you think it's just something falling, and then it kind of falls down into the camera, and you just didn't expect it to come
Yeah.
down.
I liked all the details in that scene as well, like when they couldn't turn their shields on in case of the worms and stuff. That was a big thing in the film as well. Like there isn't a lot of shield use in general about the film, mainly because it is in the desert, so they can't use it. I just noticed that. I don't know if that was like a choice that he wanted to just kind of get rid of the shields, or if it was just because of the circumstances of being in the desert. But yeah, maybe it could have been a choice to kind of move away from that because it's probably annoying to deal with it in fight scenes and stuff. Um, in the desert scenes as well, we also got a lot of like space attacks, which that's like a lot of where they're showing like the scale and stuff like they've done so well in the first one. There's that nice continuous take as they like kind of burst out the sand and attack the first space avatar. That's one of my favorite
There's
moments of action in the scene.
there were some great one takes in this film, especially like you said, the first harvester attack, but you kind of get that reminiscent sort of Chani in the end battle. When she charges into battle, that's one of my favorite shots of the film, and it's very reminiscent of Alex's favorite shot from the first one in Paul's Dream. There's literally an identical mirroring shot of when they both turn around and they've got like the knife, and it's
Yeah.
literally the exact same. And there are actually quite a few of those that were pointed out on Twitter. So the dream sequence in part one where we see Chani stabbing Paul with a knife, in kind of that yellow thing scene, is there's two shots in that are exactly the same as when Fade stabs Paul in the last fight. Those are exactly the same shots. Kind of just over the shoulder, we see Fade's head and Charlie's head, and then also the bloody knife as well. When Paul has the out at the end, is the exact same as one of the dream sequences as well in part one, which I think is used very well. But yeah, those action sequences, especially that first harvester attack, was shot beautifully. The shot that we see after Charlie shot down the ornithopter and she's just running across the thing, and it just crashes down in the
Yeah,
background of
that's
the
so good.
frame.
They
That's one of
spiked
my
the
favorite
female
shots.
vocals too. Like, 'cause right before that, they, like,
Yes.
cut the score out. There's, like, a lot of score, and, like, she shoots it, and they cut the score, and it's, like, kinda quiet for a moment, and then the back, you see the
Mhm.
run, it just slams, and then they just do that those loud female vocals just spike in. It's perfect.
The bit where the silence, you can just hear Charlie running across and laughing. I love the way that they spike this like the quiet sounds for that. I think it's done so well. But we see kind of bit with Dave Bautista's character Rabin. We kind of get that bit where he's chasing after Paul, and we get to that bit where it's kind of in an orange kind of fog and smoke and everything.
2049 again.
It's 2049 again. That is also shot very well. I like the use of the silhouettes in there. But yeah, I was going to touch on the sound then, but we'll wait until we get onto that section. So, yeah, Zeno, anything else to add?
Yeah, well, honestly, there's so much I have to say about the cinematography. But first, before this film came out, when a filmmaker is about to drop a film, this is when they're at the height of their influence, the height of their potential. So the comments they make right before typically are the things that they want to endorse the most. Like we know Chris Nolan was telling everyone to see Oppenheimer in IMAX. You know, Scorsese says some things about Marvel movies. And what does Denis Villeneuve come out and say? He says the same thing that I preach nonstop, which is fuck dialogue and fuck TV. He says he didn't say
It doesn't really make
but
sense, though. I
he
don't
said
know. I don't think he really follows what he says.
no,
I
he
can see where he's
100%
coming
does.
from.
And I'm about
kind
no,
of.
No, I agree with the statements, but I don't necessarily agree that that's what he's done.
He's saying that dialogue is for the theater and for the stage because there in TV you don't have that immersive sound landscape. So you don't have the filmmaker doesn't have control of the volume you experience it in. So it's more about just can you follow the dialogue and know what they're saying and follow the story. It's not about immersing you in experience. Like a lot of TV, not all TV, but a lot of it is just the actors kind of show up and read their lines, and that's kind of mostly the format. I know there are ones that differ, but I'm saying there's a large percentage that's what it is. The theater is, you know, it's much about the dialogue. That's what that art form is. It's a great art form. That's what that is. Cinema is something different. Dialogue is not heightened in the theater. Sound and picture are heightened in the theater. And I prefer cinema that is absolutely top tier picture on screen and top tier music and the synchronization between the two. Now, let me ask everyone this: what scene are most people saying is the most memorable scene of this film?
The final battle scene.
To be honest, the one I've heard the most is the Coliseum scene. So the one I've heard most people say they were impressed by and the most memorable is the Coliseum scene. This is not the most epic battle. This is not actually like the best action we've seen on screen. This is arguably the best piece of music in the film, and it's the most striking visually.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is proof right there of what Denis said. Because Denis said it's like the things that really leave an impact are not, even if you don't notice it, it's not the most memorable line of dialogue. It's a strong image and the way the sound affects that image. And he's saying, and he said like it's not something you notice. Like dialogue is it's easy for the audience to notice. Like most audiences can pick up on that, where the sound and music might work a little more through your subconscious. But what has the strongest effect, I believe, and Denis believes, is strong images and powerful music and sound. And the Coliseum scene, and even if you were more influenced by the epic battle at the end, that's the same thing. It's a little more epic action than the Coliseum is, but it's the same thing. It's the sound and it's the picture and just the way that affects you, and as Denis would say, a poetic way. So I think he absolutely backs up his comments, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, just in terms of the cinematography, I mean, so one thing he does a great job with is the lighting. And I do agree with part one that like the lighting was not impressive in a lot of it. Now there were some good scenes, but like a lot of it's just white, bright desert lighting, and white light is the ugliest thing you could ever do. Like white light is hideous. But I mean, that's the environment of the desert in part one. Like it's supposed to feel harsh. It's supposed to be like that's realistically what it would be. So I get that, and he still makes it. Greg Fraser makes it beautiful for his composition, his depth, all the things he does with the cinematography to heighten that light to still make it as beautiful as he possibly can. But that is part of why I thought he wouldn't be able to top the Batman, is because I thought they would take that approach, and he just opens up with this beautiful warm light and really uses like the low sun and to create just a much more striking color palette with the lighting. And he also uses him and Denis are using the sun on a Steven Spielberg level. Like Steven Spielberg famously is a professional at using the sun, and the way they place the sun in the frame is just absolutely Yeah, I wouldn't have the skill set to be able to do that. Like, it's insanely impressive what they're able to pull off with how they use the sun, where they place it in relation to the things on screen to heighten it, and just the light streams off of it, and cutting off half of it at times. It's truly remarkable. And also another thing he does a lot with his light is they limit very strong light. And an example of this is that scene towards the end when Florence Pugh is talking to, like, I always forget her name, but like the high up as Benny Gesserit lady who's like their leader. When Florence Pugh's talking to her, it's just like in the middle of the walls, there's like a horizontal strip where this strong, powerful light is able to come through. Another example would be when the Emperor's on Arrakis, and from the top, they just have like the limited warmer light coming in. And he creates, and like Greg Fraser and Denis really just paint the set. Patrice Vermette, we'll talk about later, is one of the greatest production designers in cinema history. And when you combine his set design with the limiting light sources, with just Denis and Greg Fraser's amazing ability to just paint the film with light and limit the light to create like a painting like approach. Like, I do think we're talking about the best. Like, Roger Deakins is the master of lighting. Like, no one is better at lighting cinematography than Roger Deakins. Greg Fraser is the best ever at telephoto lenses and tight lenses and that shallow depth of field. And then another great director, Christopher Doyle, I think is the greatest ever at using reflections. But yeah, they just because Greg Fraser's iconic thing I give him the most credit for is that shallow depth of field and tight lenses. He's still so great at using light and really just using the light to paint his image. And as for that first opening scene, like just the warm light right away, like it just like he said, it's Denise. What really affects you in cinema is a strong image, and you feel that image. Just when you open up on Paul's face, super intimate, and it goes so long pretty much with little to no words in the opening scene where it's just straight, like right into the action, but also just pure cinema. Like the way we're pretty much, he keeps the camera a lot near ground level. Like a lot of the camera a lot is at the level of the ground. And we open up, it's like on the hill level, it's equal with the hill. And first we see him, and then we kind of pan up, move, see Chani played by Zendaya for the first time. And then she goes up, we see Rebecca Ferguson for the first time. And just the way he's revealing the characters in this one tight frame is really sets the tone for the visual style. And everyone's talking about, of course, that first showcase of like a supernatural or heightened ability in sci-fi where they kind of float up the mountain and like the line is perfect, the composition's perfect, the motion speed is perfect. But also just the way, I know I'm getting into different territories now, but it's just the way the music, that's the first major music drop of the film, where the music just drops on that just insane impact that creates such a heightened moment there. And then in terms of action, like a lot of people like to, like I said, Greg Fraser keeping it tight rather than wide, where a lot of people like to show action in terms of more spectacle, but he puts you right ground level into the action, where we see those bodies falling, like not from a distance or anything, but we see them all from the perspective of like a real human being perspective rather than a distant observer or any kind of like VFX like following the body down. Like it's as if you were walking down the street and the body fell off a roof. Like that's how it looks. And it's just the loud sound impacts the body's falling. It's so impactful. And yeah, just some of the many ways that Greg Fraser brilliantly uses, warm lighting and those tight lenses to once again create such a different experience. Another actually quick example is in the crawler scene in terms of ground level action where Zendaya turns around and shoots the one guy and he kind of just elevates and leaves the ground. But we're still seeing all these things from a human ground level perspective, which I think makes them feel bigger and more impactful because Denis, a lot of times, it has this contrast of like human perspective where the world around looks big, and then these high angle perspectives where human beings look like ants. You see like the contrast between both of them in a lot of Denis' work, and he really has kind of mastered the balance between those two here. But I'll pass it off to Ryan.
Yeah, going back to that space harvester attack, I think the action is so brilliantly shot there because you don't really have to like I always like action where you don't have to be like looking about trying to like follow where the person's going. It's very easy to follow. Like there's a moment when Chani like attacks the guy, and Paul kind of takes his place, and you never have to move your eye. It's like in that exact spot of the frame, Paul kind of replaces her, and just that one take of the action is so brilliant. And that is kind of one of the things that disappoints me slightly about the final scene or the final battle. I would have preferred a bit more spectacle in those, like, when you go right into the armies and Chinese attacking them. I feel like there's a bit too much going on, and I don't really like the lighting in that scene. Is kind of kind of boring visually. It is just there's a lot going on, and it's kind of hard to follow China. And I just would have preferred more spectacle in those kind of like army scenes fighting. But that's just like a slight nitpick. I just I did really enjoy all that. I just wish there was more of it. Um, just going back and the space attack, or when they're attacking all the spaces, like there's those scenes when they're like Paul's watching the space officers like fall from the helicopters, just this insane scale of all these giant hoversters blowing up, him and Channing like running away, jumping over the sand dunes. There's this one when they jump over and like fall down, and you just see like the harvester like just in its full scale, like just filling the full frame. I love all those shots. Um, just all the sunset shots, like you were saying. There's so many to even like go through and break down about the like all the desert shots. Like them leaving to go to the south. There's like so many shots of the sun, like sunsets, sunrises. There's so many. It's ridiculous. Um, yeah, just the desert shots are brilliant.
The lighting in the hallway sequence between Leia Seydoux and Austin
Oh,
Butler
I
after
love
that
that
arena
scene so
sequence
much.
is
Perfection.
unbelievable.
It's perfection on every level, that whole sequence.
It is from like the fireworks like exploding on it at either side, and you just got these flashes coming
Uh,
in. You got that really lovely close up of Austin Butler's face, and oh man, it looks unbelievable. I cannot express how much
I, I
how
love when her face like disappears into the hood when like there's like I'm no
yes,
firework.
there's that shot of her face, and like the light is flickering just on and off, and you can like it looks
Mhm.
something out of like a horror movie because it's like dimly lit,
Yeah.
but you can barely see it. It's like on and off.
Yeah, I
It
was gonna say the
looks
whole like Giddy Prime scenes, like they feel like a Cronenberg movie at times. Like all the
they
weird
do.
like
I can see that.
BDSM like costumes and like they have like those people or the like followers that like eat people and stuff. Like
Oh,
there's a lot of
the
just
what?
weird like
Yeah, they're like
Austin Butler's
sick,
like
like
the three
cannibal
cannibal
stares.
girls.
yeah.
The black.
We'll get into like characters in a minute, but I think Austin Butler just elevates that sequence just so well. He's so good, man. But we'll get onto that in a bit. But another other things I wanted to touch on.
Well, real quick, a lot of what you just mentioned it is also black and white in color, which is really like cool to see. Because like that always scene is it's not the black and white like in the arena actually, like the skin tones are real, but the color palette is still like a black and white film, just in color, which has its own effect that it creates.
I have an IMAX ticket for tomorrow. I was thinking of canceling maybe, but I want to see it one last time in IMAX. I've only seen it once in IMAX before, and that was my first time, so I think I'll keep it. And I'll go see that tomorrow again one final time. But other shots I wanted to point out. Um, there's the I don't know if we talked about it yet. 'Cause it's probably some of the best shots in the film. The bird's eye shot, the over the head of Paul walking through the crowd. Um, yeah, when he goes down to the south just before that meeting is unbelievable. Seeing that on IMAX is so good, and um, we kind of get that other bird's eye shot. It's like a split screen with like the sandworm moving into the storm as well. The VFX on that are unbelievable. Um, and just the whole sequence of that massive meeting in the south in that kind of cavern place, which people are describing as one of the best sequences in the film. With kind of you get those kind of bits of light, and you can just see. I like how we just see like the things of light coming down in kind of the background of the shot. They're just not showing everything there, but just from that we can see how big of a scale that kind of sequence is in, and I think it's done brilliantly. And one last shot is the sequence where we meet Gurney again for the first time when they attack his harvester. That you can get that shot while the top half is exploding, and it kind of moves across, and kind of
I know
Gurney
exactly.
moves into frame, and it has the explosion in the
Ridiculous.
background, and it looks so sick. And he pulls his sword out at the same time. That's such a good shot. Um,
Real quick,
but
that one
yeah,
also
there's
like does depth so well. Like it goes from like this spectacle background to like a medium close up of Gurney in the foreground. The way it moves depth, like the ground swapping, it's great in that one.
It's so good. But yeah, those are the kind of the ones I wanted to touch on. Just can't get over how good that Gatey Prime sequence is. I can just watch that sequence over and over again. It's so good.
When he's walking
Yeah,
into the south, when you mentioned that scene where he gets past the crowd, and then there's the scene of like Jessica in like full costume and like all the people around her. That's like very reminiscent of the guild shot when they're coming off the ship in the first one. It's like really filling the frame of just all the characters. They're standing in their costumes. The costumes are ridiculous. We'll get into that later, but yeah,
Mm,
there's so many people in those scenes when they go down south, and it's ridiculous shots. And the
mm,
finale as well. That is some of the best scenes in the film as well. Just like the scene of the Baron and feud. When the ships fly over, and there's kind of this like frame within a frame of the Emperor's ship and all the ships
mm.
flying over. That's one of my favorite shots in the film. Yeah, and then the atomic bomb going off, the explosion, the inside wide shot of like the metallic sphere and like the rocks falling towards it. The scale of everything in that scene is like so perfect. And then I think Alex mentioned earlier that scene with the Emperor sitting at the top of his throne room. That's one of my favorite shots in the film, with the beam of light going down the middle, or with her three
Have you
main
seen
villains just like
the behind the
kneeling
scenes
things.
production things of
Yeah,
those? Unbelievable.
yeah,
yeah.
but yeah, Alex.
There's just one thing that he does visually that's really interesting is that, like I said, we open up with this real intimate shot on Paul's face, but as the once he becomes like once he drinks the poison, the shots of Paul distance wise become a lot more distance, and it's a lot more like wide, like long shots of him where we see his full body and he's at more of a distance a lot of the time. And we get a ton of close-ups on Chani, played by Zendaya, instead. So it's really interesting how he really makes us like connects us with Paul with the camera being more intimate on him until he drinks the poison, and then after that he becomes more distant, where he has us visually just identify more with Chani by the way he gives her the majority of the close-ups and reaction shots. But we'll talk more about character later. But that's just one visual thing he does that is great. And just a couple random other shots I'll fire off. Like we talked about in the first episode, he's great at using the height of the frame. There's a great kind of symmetrical shot where you have the horizontal deep layer of all the Harkonnen soldiers, and then Jamis's dead body, like in the bottom center frame. That one, they focus Paul Dolly back. That one's great.
It is
I
a great
talked
shot.
about it's perfection. And then I talked about how like he keeps the camera like ground level and hill level. He uses this twice. It's one of the coolest shots I've seen where it rolls over the hill to reveal stuff. We have one
Oh
towards the
yeah,
beginning and then
Mm.
one later that reveals the whole army. And those are some of my favorite shots of the film. And in the early one, like there's a perfect score, like beat drop as we go over the hill. It's from the perspective of the Harkonnen soldiers, right before the one I just mentioned. And those shots are just incredible.
I love the POV shots in this film. They do it as well whenever they're on a sandworm, and they do it when Paul's first raiding it, and then when they're in the warm army scene as well. There's a POV shot. I love this so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, I love like the one that you guys were talking about with where he's going through the crowd. And it's like just a medium close up at everyone with a super long lens, and they all just start spreading. And it's just the way how tight Greg Fraser gets with that shot is great. And like, yeah, like I said, I'm not gonna keep beating the dead horse, but the way he tightens the frame on things that other people would go wide for, like the scene before he rides the worm, like right before it's a long shot of him with an ultra tight lens, like, and it's still so much depth to it. Like most people are not making that choice. And there's what's the other one? And then one shot that I'm surprised no one's mentioned, which might be my favorite shot of the film, and that's when they're inside the like base of the Fremen. It's early on, and they have like their sacred water, where when people die, they
Oh
put
yeah.
their water into this kind of saving up and for the greater good of the Fremen long term in the future. And if you look at that shot just as a still image without knowing what it is, with the reflection, it looks like, when you see a lot of adventure movies, especially with these types of settings, you'll see like these grand, like inside of like a temple, like labyrinth type set designs. And like if you've seen like an Indiana Jones movie or something, and it really feels like that if you look at it as a still image and don't realize it's a reflection. it looks like they're just high up and there's just layers. And I think symbolically that's what it is because there's just layers and layers of history and history of the Fremen and different lives that are like it's like a chamber of memory and history of their people. And the way he captures that just in one still image with that water reflection shot, I think is one of the most beautiful and poetic at the same time images of the film. But I do think, kind of pivoting, one of the greatest cinematography sequences, which both of you talked about, is the crawler attack, which might be my favorite scene of the film. Just the way it starts with scale. Like first we see the mouse, and this is foreshadowing because after this, Paul will get his name and he'll take the name of the mouse. And first we see the mouse, then we see like this little like I don't even know. It's like a thumper type of motion. I don't know what even you call it.
It's a snorkel.
What's it called?
Just so they can
It's
breathe,
a
isn't it?
snorkel. It's a sand snorkel.
Hmm.
To be honest,
It's
I actually
what's
didn't
on
know
their
this.
helmets. They can breathe when they're under the sand.
Oh, I actually didn't know that. But yeah, so you see that, and then it just the gigantic scale, like perfect, like Ryan said, perfectly symmetrical, perfectly fills the frame of the crawler lands, and just the machine sync like motions, and we just hear he shoots them with such a wide lens, such a tight lens, which tightens it, and just makes the from lower angles and makes like, for example, like the tracks of the crawler just feel so grand and epic on like a scale. Shooting them up close and just you shooting a section of them, making them feel so much more epic than in a lot of other films. Like if this is, like a more traditional Disney blockbuster, they're just going to shoot a wide CGI shot of it, and they're not going to have that close intimacy of just the grand size of this opponent, and the sound is just so loud and roaring, and he lets us sit and linger with those sounds and images for a little bit to make this crawler feel so intimidating, which just building up the antagonist, which isn't even a person, a machine as their enemy, and the way they build that up just with the image, these big images and sound, and it's like just the motion sync and everything. And then as like we hear like the forget what the sound is. It's like I think it's like a crushing like sound as the crawler starts moving. It's like a crushing sound and it starts moving. And then they just pop up, spikes the score up, and we get one of the best long take action shots. Also, notice how this film never does shaky cam action. Everyone they loves this shaky cam action where you basically obstruct the action through constant movement of the handheld. Denis doesn't do that. He follows them with steady cam and it's real choreography hand to hand. A lot, even more than like epic battles, there's so much just hand to hand like knife combat in this film. And unlike the shot of Paul from the first film or the later one of Chani in this one, it's like three different Fremen soldiers, and it's like going between the three of them, like just fucking shit up as they're taking these dudes out. And yeah, it's like the way it just spikes the energy up there, and then he uses a lot of like scope shots in this film like a video game. Like the one where they shoot the thumper is awesome, but it's like straight out of like Call of Duty or Halo. And I just think it's like, kids they grow up playing video games. You want to make a popular action franchise, like this is the way younger people are conditioned to view action just from a generation who grew up on video games. So I do like how he incorporated that style into the scene. And ultimately, it leads to another one of my favorite shots, which is uses depth perfectly and changes your perspective three times. It's such an intimate shot of Zendaya's eye, and the scope rises up over the eye, and then we focus pull, and the ornithopter's fully framed inside that scope reflection perfectly. And as she shoots it, like just the three motion changes in that scene and the way it goes from like this intimate shot of the eye to like this deep fully framed shot of an ornithopter in the same shot is just another showcase of Greg Fraser and Denis and just what insanely talented storytellers they are and just directors of a cinematic experience. And even things like when they kind of take cover, Paul and Chani, they kind of run up, and as Denis likes in two, I call them 2 point motions. I don't know what the proper term is, but when two motions are happening at the same time. So they're running up, and then that like the crawler is like kind of coming down, like at a triangle angle, like they clash and meet at the same time. And it's just the little things like that where most people just have them land there, but the way Denis has those kind of clashing motions is another one of those things that just feels different and is another reason why it feels different. You can't put it into words because it's just the subtle things like that that are different from the way you've experienced action scenes in most other films that you'll see today. And yeah, we talked about, just when the big ship comes crashing down, and the crawler scene is also one of the best scores. Like it's easily one of the best scores of the film, and overall, I think it's just one of the best sequences of the film for so many reasons.
Yeah, another really big moment in the kind of film during that kind of framing desert scene is the when he learns to ride the sandworm, and that is maybe one of my favorite moments of the film. Like it's the scale and everything is ridiculous, and it starts off. This is actually one of my favorite moments of him actually using shallow focus, and it's when it's the thumper going off, and it slowly reveals kind of just how large the kind of like the landscape and stuff behind them is, because it's not like normal desert. It's like hard like sandstone kind of like surface, so it's like it's pretty different to what we've usually been seeing. And then we see the like grandfather worm like slowly arriving in the horizon, and this whole shot of like Paul running to the worm is exactly what I've been wanting for like the for both movies. It's like the poster for the first one, where you just see like a small guy at the bottom of the sand dune, and when he pans out for like this really wide shot of like the full dune, it like Paul is just this little bug like just running up the hill, and I just love this moment so much. And then when he finally jumps onto it, like I I love like how we're kind of just really intimately like stuck with Paul, like just desperately trying to grab onto this like worm. Yeah, just talk about the later, but just to see it from the score and everything in that scene is just so perfect. And yeah, just this is one of the best scenes just for showing like scale and just the size of the worms and the desert and Paul is so good.
I just love the way that the worm riding kind of sequences are shot. Like you said, they're just so intimate, and you just get so immersed into it. And like the kind of like the POV shots of like we're like riding on the worm, and like is as it's going over the dunes. I think,
Mm.
so good, man.
Yeah, it's the worm riding scene is like, like Scorsese talks about Marvel movies as theme park, and like this movie is not by any means a theme park movie. Like this is a piece of art. Obviously, Scorsese would agree with that, but he does have like those theme. Like I said, like it's not just telling a story; it's creating an experience, and this is kind of like just a thrilling theme park like moment that you can only capture through cinema. This is what he means by like cinema can be more than dialogue, because this is an experience that just will not feel the same when you're watching this at home on a 55-inch screen. It's when you're immersed in this, and he creates like without feeling the wind coming at us. Like he uses all the different tools to create just like the angle of Paul's body and the motion on screen, and that sand those sandstorm kind of clouds are such a major recurring part of the film and the character of Arrakis. And it really like just the way it creates that obstruction and just the force, and it feels like, if we're in that situation, we would be struggling to hang on. And also just the way he built up the scene is so perfect with, like I said, that really tight shot of it's a long lens shot of a his full body, which is rare. And there's also depth with it where we see the worm kind of coming up and then it dips. So it's like we don't know where it's at. We're curious for a moment, then pops back up and the rumbling sound just gets louder. And I think honestly, like the way he uses like that, like Denis uses sound to vibrate the whole theater. Especially, this is why you have to see this film in IMAX, because it's literally vibrating your seat. Like that is what we mean by creating an experience. Like he is constantly using large waves of sound to vibrate the seat, and when he mixes that in with these images to create and even a level of obstruction with the images to create this sandworm, and then there's that curiosity as we go up the hill, and like we don't know what's going to happen, and then it's you get that pure beauty of the desert, and then the side shot and that perfect match cut to end the scene. It's just absolutely perfect. But I think with the worm scene, as much as it's a visual spectacle, more than anything, it comes from the other big strength of this film, which is the sound design and the audio. And I think what really makes the audio so effective here is it's ultra dynamic sound in every scene, and every scene normally starts at the opposite volume from where the climax is going to be. So the worm scene, for example, starts like with near silence. Like it's nearly silent at the start because Denis knows it's going to grow to something big. A counterexample, real quick, would be the love scene on the top of the hill with Paul and Zendaya. We start that scene with Javier Bardem riding a worm, and it's that's setting up the worm riding. It's creating a sense of atmosphere around them, but it's also starting that scene really loud because that love theme is going to be a lot quieter, more intimate. So he does the opposite of that here, where he starts super quiet because he knows it's going to build super loud, and that rumble kind of comes up to us with just begins vibrating until there's the worm. And then once it gets on the worm, obviously that is one of the loudest, most impactful scenes of the film. But I think this is a great time to pivot into talking about the audio because the sound is such an essential part of this film and just the cinematic experience and why the audio not being uh, delivered to the audience in the correct format with it being pushed to streaming is a big part of why Dune One reactions likely weren't what they should have been. But yeah, I think it's just such a huge element of the film.
Yeah, this is kind of one of those things that you need to see in IMAX just because IMAX elevates the sound level just beyond anything and is just so like so nice to hear such like vast array of kind of sounds. Obviously, we saw in part one with the thumpers sound so nice, and they're kind of evolving the sounds of the worms as well, which is just so impressive to see. I kind of mentioned before, my favorite use of that sound is in that first harvester attack with kind of um them exploding the ornithopter and the way they kind of cut in and out of the silence, and when they have the silence they make kind of the little things louder, and I think that works really really well. Another sequence where the sound I think works perfectly is that scene when kind of Rabin is chasing down kind of Paul after they kind of attack the thing with we've got kind of the orange smoke and fog scene that kind of goes completely silent, and then you kind of hear like them running around, and the sounds of like them getting tripped up and stabbed is just so piercing to the silence. It works so well, and I like I said, the little thing like amplifying the little sounds in silence I think works really really well, and love how kind of isolated they are, but it's so cool and good to see them kind of even evolving the sound design of part one, considering how perfect the sound design is in that.
Yeah, a lot of the sounds that they done so perfect in the first one are a lot even more important even in this one because you spend so much time in that desert. So like just all the sounds from the deserts, the sand, the space, even stuff like the wee mouse, like there's so much of it more because I was just spending so much time in the desert. And that one of the scenes like Alex was saying about at the start of that worm scene is it's so brilliant when Paul was climbing up the top of the sand dune, and you can just hear all you can hear is like Paul breathing. And then when he pounds at the top of the hill, it's a very muted like noise. You can tell that it's not going to attract the worm, and then he has to move further down, and just how different the sounds of the different types of sand or the sandstone like under it is, like how different it sounds. Like depending on like which side of the mountain they're on. Just everything about like whilst of the worms, how unique the sound that they use to kind of communicate. There's that scene with the small sandworm with when they extract the water of life, when the woman takes it out of the sand pit and like she like kind of talks to it to calm it down. I think that the sound's great and that. I love during the space harvester attacks as well. There's those moments when I don't know what they're called, but they're like the guns when they shoot like the blue beams out of them. I think the sound is like, so brilliant when they like shoot them and it goes through the space harvesters and all the explosions and yeah, just the timings about when they know when to make it quiet, to make those explosions more impactful. I think they do them so perfectly during those space harvester attacks. So yeah, just somehow done an even better job on part one with their sound. So yeah, it's just phenomenal job with that aspect.
Yeah, I think, we talk about the sci-fi genre. It's and Denis even said, like, the actor said when working with Denis when, like, they didn't really know what to do, Denis would just say, like, "Do sci-fi shit." So, like, he was very aware of, like, it being another addition and building on the genre of sci-fi, and I think what really defines the genre more than anything is sound. I think sci-fi, the genre, has always been a pioneer of sound, and a lot of the greatest sci-fi films ever, like Star Wars and Blade Runner, were really true. They were pioneers in a lot of ways, with, visual effects, set design, all that stuff. But these films were always pioneering sound on such a great level, and I think Denis is taking that to another level. And again, like, a lot of people are saying they don't know how to put this film and the experience into words, and sound and music are some of the hardest things to put into words. But I do think that the sound mix especially is a big reason why it's having the effect it is on people, and just the juxtaposition between loud and quiet and just the way it flows between the two for such a great impact, I think is a big reason why this film has had such a big emotional impact on the audience. And it really is every scene for the most part begins in the opposite volume of where it's going to be and then builds in the opposite direction. Like the scenes that are memorable for being loud start quiet or vice versa. And there's just so many examples of this, but also like things like we talked about, like with the action getting very close and loud to humans as we see them at a ground level. Like when the bodies fall, the impact is just so hard, and the rhythm picks up, and they just start falling more and more. Ryan talked about later in the film when they fire that first shot at the Emperor, and the rocks start dispersing, and we're seeing it from a distance, and it's like they're these tiny little rocks, and then we cut up close, and they land so close. The rock is like gigantic in scale, it's dwarfing the humans, and it's just that loud impact. And the way it plays just with the distance of sound, I think the most impactful, like, there's a lot of big score moments and a lot of loud moments people are going to remember. Actually, let me ask you both of you before I say it. What do you think is the loudest moment of the film?
Mm,
I'm not sure I'm right about this, but I think there's one
When the
scene.
ornithopter crashes down in that harvester attack scene
Okay.
after the silence, and
like, do you
and the
mean outside
body.
of the score moments, or
No, you could use a score moment. There's one scene I really think was the loudest. I might be wrong, but there's one scene I really do think is the loudest.
the first that come to mind is when Paul stands up on the worm, and then the
Yeah.
other worm attack when they come in the final battle, and when they come out the storm. It's the
Both
first
of
to
those
come to mind.
Yeah, both of those could be it. For me, I think it's the poison. When both of them drink that poison, like, it just shakes the
Oh
theater,
yeah,
Oh yeah,
and
when the blue liquid goes over his
blue.
sister
Yeah,
in the womb,
yeah,
that's very loud. Like the bass is really loud. That could be
like,
it.
those are scenes are just booming, and they both start pretty quiet. They're just like, the sound is just I felt like those vibrated the theater to almost like an overwhelming degree, where it's like it's just deafening the sound there. And I think it's interesting because we know the poison, how much that really just turns both of them into completely different characters. To the point where like they're almost playing different characters. And I think making the poison that loud and impactful, and it's not like you said, like it's not the one that's the most noticeable necessarily, but I think it just leaves such a huge impact to such a degree through the sound. Like you feel it in the moment on such a great level. And he's just, so great at using sound. Like another couple small examples would be like it's a pretty quiet scene when before the poison when Rebecca Ferguson is trying to get the one Fremen to let Paul drink the poison, and she's like, he'll never survive, and then she spikes with the voice, like, let him try, and just the way that scene's quiet and spikes up there with the volume for that, and then like Gurney's introduction, like we hear the crawler with this big sound, and then there's like that halt, and there's the pause before the sound spikes back up when the mine comes over. And there's just this constant juxtaposition between loud and quiet, which they do such a great job with throughout the whole film. Actually, another one of the best of those juxtapositions is when Paul gives that, speech to everyone when they all start believing in him as the Messiah. And there's these loud chants, loud score, and then it just dims out to silence where all we hear is chimes when the Emperor gets the scroll. I think that is just such like from one of the big loud impacts to like this very ultra quiet scene, but like I think the fact that the chimes are there rather than pure silence makes a much greater effect on it. but it's so great. But you know what I really think is I think the poison's the loudest scene, but I think the best use of the sound juxtaposition is the scene that we've already given a ton of praise to, and that's the seduction scene. The seduction of Austin Butler from I believe her name's Lady Margot. I
Yeah,
believe.
Lady Margot Fenring.
Yeah, and it's it starts with this grand set design. The fireworks are going off, these huge light flashes, and it's slowly like the music seduces the audience almost into the music and the sound as it gets like to this really quiet, much more intimate. Like there's really actually not a lot of wide lenses used in the film. Like they're sprinkled throughout. It really doesn't use them too much, but it starts like this ultra wide hallway, and then gets just so intimate with Austin Butler and Lady Margot. And just that scene is one of the greatest examples of the sound juxtaposition, where also then the way they use the slow motion there and that score is perfect. That sequence is just perfection on so many levels. But the the way they use the sound is going from really loud at the start, the opposite of the worm scene. They go from this really loud atmosphere to this really quiet, intimate scene is one of the greatest examples of sound use.
I I think the biggest thing that stood out between like the score and the sound in this one compared to the first one was I felt like Hans Zimmer's score like more incorporated just the general sounds of the film and the desert and stuff like that. Whereas this one feels a bit more like tracks that you can listen to outside of the film. I just felt like that personally. Like I listened to both of them like religiously after watching them anyway. Like I think they're both listening. You're able to listen to both of them outside the film is like their own thing. But this one has like more like just like great tracks where it kind of reminds you of moments of the film, whereas the first one incorporates a lot of the sounds from the culture and just everything. And there's more like kind of down moments, and I mean that's more because in the first one the score is always there, it's always present. Kind of in the first one, you're just kind of when you listen to that first one, you're kind of just incorporating all the different sounds, and you're kind of living in the world of Dune. Whereas two has more like traditional tracks that are just amazing to listen to, and Dune one has so many high moments when the score like kind of comes in. Like the score's always present. Like I said, like there's moments when it rises really high, or when it goes away completely. Like they both stand out so much more in the first one. Whereas I feel like there's more quiet moments in part two, in terms of the score. And like whenever you think of when I think of part one, like I think of like the box scene when the score rises really high, or leaving Caladan. Like these are all like great moments that like otherwise wouldn't be like these gigantic moments in the film. They're really elevated by the score. Whereas Dune 2, I feel like kind of uses these big set piece action moments where like the score kind of comes in, like raiding the sandworm when he stands up, or when the sand or the sandworm army come in. The sandworms track is like that's one of my favorite tracks from the film. So it's a bit different from the first one, but yeah, still phenomenal. I think it's up there. Up there's the best work of Hans Zimmer. It's Arrival as well when he first comes into the south of the planet. It's so deep and heavy, and like that kind of like strong bass is kind of stands out from the rest of the track. Like you can't help but get hyped when Paul's like walking into the south, even though it's not like a exactly like a moment where like you should be rooting for Paul. Like, but it's like such a cool moment. And when he stands up from the worm and the sandworm like explodes behind them, like we were mentioning earlier, the score rises and it's such an unbelievable moment. And when he's on the sandworm, that POV shot, that is insane. The like the score rising as he's standing up. I forgot to mention as well, Channy's reaction from that scene. The when he finally like stands up on this like grandfather worm and everybody starts chanting. That's when one of the big moments when they start to believe he's like um the Messiah, and they start worshiping him for riding the worm. So I really love that moment just for her reaction as well. But yeah, there's so many like scenes that I've just constantly been, or scores that I've been from this track that I've been listening to constantly, like the Warm Army or the Harkonnen Arena, like you said. Like I think that's definitely some of the more like unique tracks in the score that I always go back to. So yeah, just the score is ridiculous. It's so good. But yeah, what did you think about it?
For me, the score is less prominent than part one. I prefer the score of part one overall. I feel like it has a bigger impact on me and kind of elevates the scenes. And I think it feels like it's there in more scenes. And I honestly, I think I still listen to the one in part one more, but there are definitely some standout moments in this. The Harkonnen Arena score is absolutely fantastic. I think that one stands out more because it's different. It's the most different from kind of the part one score, and it's my favorite scene of the film. And that's an example of I know to say, and I just
You're frozen.
yeah,
Ryan,
it's
are you?
Can you hear us?
I
there
can
we go.
hear
I
it.
think that's good.
Ryan, did he freeze for you too, or is that just me?
It
Yeah,
did
yeah,
cut
yeah,
out for
yeah.
a
Also
sec.
froze.
Okay.
Yeah, you froze for us.
You were saying that it would Harkonnen was the most
Yeah,
different. After that.
yeah. I just yeah, I think there's kind of also the ending as well, the Kiss the Ring track as well that kind of plays over that final sequence as we see them go off tour. I think is really nice as well. I kind of like that kind of less toned down kind of music. Is really nice to listen to.
Yeah.
But I like the variety in this, but yeah, I just thought the part one score for me just hits different, honestly, and a bit more noticeable. But then again, it's a similar kind of film, so obviously it's a follow-on film, so you're always going to have that kind of similar score. But I like the Harking Arena definitely is a massive standout for me. So yeah, I from our kind of part one video, I don't have kind of much tried on the score because it's majority quite similar. But yeah, Alex, what have you got to add?
So this gets to my only other kind of real criticism of the film, which is that I do. So when I look at Denis Villeneuve, I think is an insanely talented filmmaker. Like I love his work, and I'm a big fan of his films. But my biggest issue with a lot of them is that I don't think I think he neglects often the top three most important things in film: one, music; two, music; three, music. But yeah, I think that his films often play a lot of the scenes without much music, and a lot of his scores I think are not super memorable in his earlier work, which has always been kind of my biggest, I guess, criticism of his earlier stuff. And I just was so happy when we finally got to Dune and see him do like a wall-to-wall music film and have a score as epic as what Hans Zimmer did in that film. And for me, the score is such a big part of why I hold Dune 1 so highly as a film. So I was kind of, and I do think that he received criticism, like the pacing thing with why the film should be longer. I think other people were also telling him that the score was too much, and I think a part of that is because a score that's such an epic surround sound mix for the score and sound of Dune 1, when people are watching the compressed version of that through TV versus the surround sound speakers, it can become harder to hear the dialogue because the score is now compressed with it. And I think maybe I haven't seen Dune 1 at home. Like I've seen it like 5 times in the theater. I've never watched it at home. But I think likely based on what I've heard from other people, the score was a little overwhelming in terms of their ability to hear the dialogue when watching at home. So I think a lot of people maybe said like the score was a bit much, which I disagree with 100%. But because of that, I think he toned the score back a bit too. And I wish he had not, like Ryan said earlier, I wish he had had a little more confidence in his direction there. Like, not that I'm confident, but like I wish he would have listened to the critics a little less on some of these things. And this is the big one for me where there's very impact. Because like I said, I said this in the last episode. The music is a tool that I don't think you need to limit it for it to be powerful. For quiet is the opposite. I think quiet is very boring and ineffective when used a lot, but very powerful when limited. And I think there's great moments where that quiet is perfect. Like before the rise of Sandworm and that scene where the Emperor gets the scroll are perfect quiet moments. But especially in like the first act, there's a couple scenes that I think were the dialogue scenes that also have no score that I feel like the quiet's kind of wasted on those scenes. And I feel like even if you gave it not the most high volume in your face score, just gave it some type of music would have helped those scenes flow a little better. Some of those dialogue scenes. So this is a minor criticism, but this is one of my only other criticisms about the film.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah, yeah, I think, it's just like that's one. So yeah, kind of. I agree with what Ryan said. Like, I think that when I listen to the soundtracks, Dune 2 is a soundtrack on iTunes that I enjoy more. But I think that Dune Part 1 is better used score. I think Leaving Caledon is the best track in either film, but overall, I think the music of Part 2 is better. But I think Part 1 is better used. Like Oscar talked about with the shots, like letting them hold a little longer. Like Dune 1 does have a lot of those moments where we just like when the ship's rising out of the water. It's just that holding on just the music and picture for an extended amount of time. I wish he'd done a little more of that, just taking it in, the spectacle, the image, and the music. Like, I love those moments in part 1 and wish that he had done a little more of them in part 2. But where we get music in this film absolutely is such a big part of it, why it's so effective. Like, I agree, the Harkin Arena is one of the most different sounding. And when I think I don't know if it's the guitar, what it is that, like, when Butler's, like, walking through the arena and that one, whatever sound it is comes up, it's just so intense, and it's just like it just like punches you in the face with its score. Yeah, I mean, both I think mentioned "Kiss the Ring." Like it's just one of the most beautiful tracks I've ever heard. It's so epic on so many levels, and that's what the score is. Like it's epic. And Hans Zimmer, I talked about. There's not a doubt in my mind that this film would not be good because of Denis' passion behind it. And when you hear Hans Zimmer interviews, like he is just as passionate as Denis. And Hans relates to it. I know he said from like he was a German who moved to England and being kind of having to be in a foreign culture and adapting to it is a part that Hans I know identified with. And apparently they said Hans just even like when it was like months before release, like they were pretty much done with the film. Like Hans just kept pumping out music, and Denise like Hans, like we released in 3 months, like the film's done, but he was just so inspired to a level, like just kept pumping out music. I know he's already working on the score for Dune Messiah. And Hans talks a lot about just, having fun with it and like being playful with the music. And you really feel that because there's just such a range. And then he even says that he warns his sound designers that Hans kind of toes the line between sound and music and really ventures into like in a more creative, like experimental sound territory with his music rather than like he's not using traditional orchestral instruments. It's not an orchestral score. It's much like a band, and the way he uses, drums and more unique sounds. And there's just no other score that sounds like this. Like Dune 1 and 2, regardless of which you think is better, I think are undeniably Hans's best scores. I know there's probably a couple people are going to disagree with us, but I think that Dune 1 and 2 are the best Hans Zimmer scores. Like he brought his absolute A game. There's so much passion in this. And I know Oscar said it's a little similar. I think it's a completely fresh score. Like I know the female vocals come back a few times, like when he's riding the worm and that scene with the crawler. Like the Caledon
And
theme
when he
song.
rises from the water of life, the
Yeah, you're right.
women
There
come
too.
in.
But overall, I think a lot of these sounds are fresh. A lot of it is new. And like that drum rumble we heard a ton in the first film. We almost never hear that in this one. The Harkonnen themes are pretty different. So I think he really takes a very new direction with the score, which I like to see. Like I like how he gave it very fresh sounds for this one. But I'll pass it off to Ryan.
Yeah, going back to like when you were saying how effective it is when they make it quiet. I think one of the best moments of that is during the final scene where should Rafa and Paul like they completely take away the music completely, and it's just the whole fight scene is just you just hear them fighting, and like Paul was so out of breath in that scene, so it's like so like effective that you can just hear. That's all you can hear. You can't hear like music distracting you from it. I think that was totally the right decision. I think that is mostly what you should be doing for like fight scenes like that. But yeah, I think I completely agree with everything you said about the score. I might prefer part one. I don't know. I need to rewatch it again just to directly compare the scores. But yeah, I do think there is a big difference in some of it. I love the desert stuff. The what's the track called? Like the kind of like love like scores whenever like when they kiss and there's that like panning shot around them. I really love that score. I can't remember what it's called. But yeah, just the electric guitars. I wanted the bagpipes to come back in that scene with Gurney. I'm going up the stairs. I was expecting them to come in, and then they didn't.
No, they
But
were they were
yeah,
there. They come back with Gurney.
were they actually? Wait,
Yeah.
what?
Did they?
You
Yeah,
sure?
it's
I
a
don't think
little
they did.
subtle. It's when he kills Dave
Hmm.
Bautista. They trust me, they're there. The song's called, I think,
Mhm.
Gurney's Attack or something. That's one of my favorite tracks of the film, and you just see Gurney just like first it's like one of those ant shots where we're looking down on everyone, and then you just cut into the ground, and it's like their ants being slaughtered. You cut it, and you see Gurney just slicing through the pack. He's just like man on a mission, so determined. There's a lot of obstruction to it. He's just fucking shit up, and then he gets to the front, separates from everyone, and then when we cut to that shot of him walking up the steps, the score like changes to just such an epic score. It's one of my favorite music moments of the film. But in there, you can hear the bagpipes. They're mixed in with other sounds, but they're there.
Mm, interesting. Yeah, I do really like that scene because you see the shields come back in that moment. Oh, one thing, why does Batista not have a shield on in that scene?
I guess like honor, maybe like it was like the honorable one-on-one fight. That's just my
Mm,
guess.
No clue.
yeah, that was something I noticed in the last watch. But yeah, oh, another thing about the score, the Warm Army track, that is the first watch of that is like one of the most insane like cinema moments I've ever had. Like I had goosebumps like in my head. I that score was doing stuff to me that I didn't even think was physically possible. I had goosebumps in places I didn't think could happen. Like it was ridiculous. Like my jaw was dropped like during the when the sandworms are coming in and they're riding it. That whole scene was just insane. But yeah, I think that's all I've got to add about the score. What about you? Do you have anything else to add, Oscar?
Um, no, I don't think I do. Not really, no.
I do. It's yeah, there's a couple things. So I love the love theme, and he takes rather than
Mm,
like a more grand approach to a love theme that you traditionally see, like across the stars in Star Wars, for example, which is like this real grand orchestral. It's very like lone instrument, like a woodwind, like nature sound almost, and it's much more like a quieter type of love theme, which is an interesting approach to see from Hans. But then with the kiss, it like grows into like a much bigger score, and I love then it carries into that montage. And then like even though it's like the relationship is kind of moving forward with wartime stuff, he adds like those loud beats that are just so impactful when we cut to like them bonding through like taking out the crawlers together and stuff. That long kind of the first love montage you could call it, and I think the score there is so effective. I really love the scene where it's a super intimate shot. Both of them are just close ups. There's no like paying attention to anything about the world around them. And it's Chani's teaching Paul something. And just the score just slightly builds up over her dialogue. And you see Paul looking at her and then dims down. It's just such a small and subtle and intimate scene where the score and the sound mix are just so perfect there. I thought that was a really great score moment and a great example of why music is more powerful than dialogue, especially for like romance, especially. I think music is always more powerful than dialogue, like to such an insane degree. And uh, another, a really unique one is that kind of flash forward, I guess you'd call it, or dream vision of Rebecca Ferguson walking in slow motion into the sun with the warm yellow light, where we never really see her face, but there's like this weird like click sound. It's very loud compared to the other instruments we hear in relative nearby it, and it's just very unique. I thought that was just super effective and creative from Hans. And then the Harkonnen Arena is, of course, one of the best. And also, like right after like the loud, like military like march of the military like march of the Harkonnen to end their sequence, we then kind of go to a quiet, more intimate scene, like moving back into the desert with this like intimate shot of the telescope before Gurney's introduced. Just another great sound mix moment. And yeah, another great use of the score is when Paul says that's what we're gonna do. Like we'll do it by being Harkonnens after we find out. There's that epic Ryan talked about. It's just flying through the desert, that epic sounding shot. It's like very bass heavy. And this sound to me, it's like big and epic and impactful, but it sounds like a Harkonnen score. And this is where Paul's going in to become like the Fremen Messiah. And it's really like it sounds like the Harkonnen score, like that industrial sounding deep beat uh, type of music, and I think it's so insanely impactful. And just that entire walking through the crowd sequence, the walking up, and that like out of focus shot of him with the cape feels like Anakin Skywalker in Revenge of the Sith for me, and it's just so epic that entire score for that whole sequence. But the most epic, of course, is the final Kiss the Ring track, where a lot of the focus is it's like there's like these dips in the score to like where like when Zendaya leaves, there's like a dip, and then it kind of rises back up, and then it dips when Gurney speaks, and then the chants begin, and the music change like as the it's like the music is high up, and then the sound of the chants comes up, and as the chants come up, the music like switches and then comes back up even higher, and then when we cut to Chani at the end, just for that very final sequence, it's just some of the most epic sounding music of the film. There's just such range to it in terms of just volume and instruments. And it's there's just it's one of those things like this is I can't even put it into words, but you feel so much emotion and like the rage in Zendaya and the conflicted emotion she's going through in that moment. Like it's the most epic piece of music you could ever end a film with. And even though, Denis and limits the music a little more in this one from Dune Part One, the moments he uses it are as impactful as any score in any film ever, and it's just insane. I wish I was more knowledgeable about instrument use and stuff so I could break that down a little more, but it's really just so impressive, and I've been listening to the score on repeat over and over again since I left the theater. But I'm curious what both of your favorite tracks are.
Auction Arena, without doubt.
Yeah, Harkonnen Arena or the Warm Army, or I don't remember what it's called, but the love one that you were talking about.
Yeah,
Can't
for
remember what it's
me,
called.
it's Harkonnen Arena, but I also really and Kiss the Ring. I also love Crawler Attack, the Gurney Attack, and the one love theme. Hold on, I'll find the name. It is A Time of Quiet Between Storms.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's it.
So there's just so many great ones. It's so good. But I think now it's time to talk about the man himself, the visionary behind the film, the one and only Denis Villeneuve and his filmmaking. So, Oscar, why don't you take us away on to some of the brilliant ways Denis Villeneuve tells the story?
It's crazy, really. I just think they expand on the world building in this film, like beyond more than they did in part one in just some incredible ways. Just from the visual tease of each planet. Obviously, Arrakis is like we get obviously just flowing sand, and Gedi Prime is this really harsh black metal. And then we've got I don't ever think we get the name of it, but where the Carina house live with the Emperor and her daughter, but that's kind of a bit rainy and nice nature and things like that. And I think the contrast between those three kind of planets that we see is done so well. And I like how we expand and see more of Gedi Prime than we did in the first film, which I really enjoyed seeing. But yeah, it's just like we've been talking about throughout, just the sense of scale that they bring to everything, and the world building is just like you wouldn't think they could expand on it from part one, but they do. Like we said throughout, I just wish we hold on those a bit more, and just needs a bit more in there compared to part one, honestly. Which is kind of but the set pieces for this film are the kind of one of the things that they do kind of really achieve on. Obviously, that the sandworm scene when Paul Reiser for the first time, they said that took 3 months to film, which is absolutely crazy. So from kind of that sense, in the set pieces and the arenas, they're just stepping up every single time, trying to push those boundaries of grand filmmaking, and it's just so wonderful to see. But yeah, hand off to Ryan for now. It was just my initial thoughts.
Yeah, so the set pieces are insane. I think a lot of what we were talking about were like a lot of these direction maybe seemed like in some responses to the first one. And I think for anybody that complained that it maybe took a bit to get going in part one, like this really just kind of wastes no time throwing you in just straight off the bat. There's all those action scenes with like Jessica and Paul kind of venturing into the desert, picking up where we left off with the Fremen and the Sardaukar and searching for them. Like that's a great action scene just to start off with. And I think that I love so much. Just I wish kind of it feels like Paul, Jessica, and like his sister kind of against the world at the beginning of the film before they kind of get fully incorporated into the Fremen like community. Um, and how he kind of teases the kind of quick turn of the characters that we're going to eventually be seeing. Because we kind of leave off the first one with Paul and Jessica. They are like the good guys. There's not really any huge like kind of things that show towards is like kind of them becoming anti-heroes or anything, but straight off the bat they're kind of just laying the track of all of them like saying that they're going to start influence people in the Fremen community, or that Paul does believe in revenge and stuff like compared to his father. So that I think they do lay out these kind of like character arcs really well very early on in the film. And I love so much just like the first half when they're adapting to life with the Fremen. Like there's a real focus on like the characters during this half. Like there's so many moments when like there's just like I don't know, it's like simple stuff, but it's like characters like just like looking at each other, like cracking smiles, casual jokes. Like we see a lot of like their character flaws and like their fears about the future and stuff like that. And I think it's all written in like a very human way, in a way that and maybe have a bit more emotion than maybe we didn't see in the first half. We get a lot more like in-depth views of all the characters, like Stilgar and Chani. They're kind of just more side characters in the first one, whereas now we get like a big kind of in-depth view of more of how their characters act, and I think there are great performances from the film. And there's through the film we get like strong religious themes just constantly present throughout like everything about the film, and like we have those moments of like exposition where like you hear like Jessica's inner monologue and Paul at the start, and it's really driving home like that kind of idea of controlling the Fremen through religion and their beliefs. And um there's those exposition scenes, but there's a lot that isn't just like thrown in your face. There's a lot of just like the religions and kind of cultures that it kind of shows for that. And I really loved like the north south divide that he kind of incorporated, because I think that's not in the book. Is it correct? There's not like
Um, no, I don't
what
think
they
it is
called.
now. I think no.
Yeah,
The kind of
because
scenes with the south.
fundamentalists in the south,
Yeah,
I
the
think that they added
fundamentalist.
that.
Yeah. But the exposition was a bit hit or miss with me. I think there's a couple lines of dialogue in the film where I'm just like, I'm
We
just
must
like,
change the non-believers. Or is that what it
it's
says?
not. It's
Is
like
it-
someone said the other
I'm
day.
more for
It's like Nolan possessed the writers in those a couple of scenes, because yeah,
the
I don't adore a lot of exposition. And I just feel like some of like a couple lines are a bit spoon fed in this. But yeah, I preferred it. I preferred it in. I think the writing's better in part one than it was in this overall, and the big reason is because Eric Roth was not there in part two. He was busy doing Killers of the Flower Moon. But that's kind of like the major departure of like the writing side. But yeah, I still think it overall is pretty solid. Just the writing could have done with a few tweaks, in my opinion.
Yeah, I do agree, but it's a bit handholdy at times.
Mm.
Which is it's a giant blockbuster. Like if they're trying to appeal to everybody, like it makes sense. It also it's kind of like the book. At least from what I've read, you kind of get an insight into their inner monologue quite a lot at times, like in between all the what's actually happening. So it's kind
I
of like the book, I thought at least.
I didn't mind like Lady Jessica's dialogue with her talking to her daughter like that. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, there's just a couple like even like there's just like words there, and I'm like you don't really need that on the end, like an end of a sentence or something. It just feels like at times it feels like they're trying to get like terminology and like jargon out and like repeatedly get it out there, and I'm like, you just don't really need to say that over and over. I feel like water of life is mentioned like a bit too much. And like when Paul, when they give him his name Usul, like Charlie calls him that quite a lot, and I'm just like, you don't need that in there a lot. You only need a couple, like once or twice, and that's fine. Yeah, it's just me being nitpicky with the writing, but I don't love a lot of exposition in a film, honestly. That's just me.
I hate exposition as well, and it's another reason I don't like dialogue. So I do agree with you. Like and like I said, like I think if you throw some score on it, maybe it's a little easier to listen to. So it's like
Yeah,
Mhm.
and
the moment when it's
I
like
feel like
the exposition scene, you want to cut the score. I don't know.
the exposition that they used in part one, like I explained, I had no problem with. I thought that was done really well and handled well, but this one was a bit more kind of in your face and noticeable. That I just
Yeah.
the sway the non-believers line every time, man. Every time I watch it, it's like, oh, yeah, it just sounds so awkward and so bad.
It doesn't really make sense as well because
It
I
doesn't.
feel like because he kind of he's not like he doesn't stay consistently at that level of like trying to be a prophet. He kind of goes
And
back
the line
after that.
delivery as well. I think that's just like that's the one
Yeah.
Chalamet's one slip up in the film. The line delivery is just it feels really off, and like that one sentence, it just doesn't sound right. But yeah, I thought the exposition could have been a bit better, but that's just me nitpicking.
hmm I did
Yeah,
love like just all the religious stuff with the North and South to believe and how a bunch of them are like really differently like influenced, like Stilgar in particular, and maybe a bit too comedic how much he was like convinced about
yes,
the
I
SL
totally
group.
agree
But
there.
yeah.
But for
Yeah.
every like poor bit of writing, there are some good like writing bits, like the bit in the meeting sequence where kind of Paul's delivering, and we see that change in character when he's like, this world was known by a Fremen name, Dune. That line is so good, and that the whole dialogue in that sequence actually is really good, and I like the way they incorporated like the Fremen language into this a lot more. I thought that worked really well, and I like seeing that side and exploring their side of that religion. Um, but yeah, there's for every bad bit of dialogue, there was an even better one in this. So yeah,
By the way, you both make me very happy that I have not read the book because I feel like I appreciate it more having not read the book because the three films I hate the most in the world are all not saying you hate this film. I'm saying the three films I hate the most
it's
are
Great
all,
Gatsby, one of them.
of course, Great Gatsby is my
Is
favorite
Lord
book.
of the Rings one of them?
It's
No,
one of
Lord
my
of the Rings
favorite
is
books as well.
my favorite
I've
book is
studied
The
that
Great
book to
Gatsby.
death.
Guess what my number one least favorite movie is?
Um,
The
Percy
Great Gatsby.
Jackson.
The Great Gatsby. It's my favorite
Uh,
book, and I hate the movie. The other two films I can't stand. I hate the 2014 Ninja Turtles, and I hate the Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye. All three of them are bad adaptations of something that I like. So whenever you have your own pre-existing idea, you're always going to be more critical. Which as long as
True.
you have your own idea of what you think it should be in your head, and you build attachment to certain elements. So I am pretty happy I didn't read the book. I feel like I do appreciate it a little more because of that.
In this case, I don't mind the changes in like adaptation wise. I didn't necessarily mind the changes that they made in this. That's not necessarily my complaints, but yeah, Great Gatsby. I've studied that book to death. I had to do it in high school. I've read it multiple times. I don't mind the film. They've done it to death though. They've made so many things of it. Um,
And they're
but
all
I
terrible.
don't I don't think the film was terrible. Yeah, great
I
book though. So
it's my
good.
favorite book of all time. I love the book. But moving on
That's
from the
just
great
Baz Luhrmann for you.
yeah. But Denis Villeneuve, on the other hand, has such appreciation for the story. I love seeing him live out his childhood dreams, and yeah, it's also kind of like a return to a desert movie after his breakout film Ensemble. I know that wasn't his first, but that was like the film that really put him on the map. Which is, and then he talks about like what he loved about this book as a kid, as Paul Atreides finding a home in a foreign culture, and finding his own identity and is kind of this love for foreign culture. And I think you do see that from Timothée Chalamet in the film, even though he does it. He does what he does in the end. I think you really do see him fall in love with this culture. And also, Denis says that he, at one point in his life, had to choose between his two passions of cinema and biology. and he chose cinema, but he loved the book's connection to biology, which apparently Denis is very into. I got a D in biology. I don't know shit about it, but anyway, but yeah. So I think in terms of his filmmaking, he does it's so he talks about it. I saw a video of him talking about his references, and the first couple make a lot of sense. Did either of you see this video where he talks about the five biggest influences?
Don't think so.
I don't think so.
So first he says Lawrence of Arabia. Obviously, you see that. Another one he
Yep.
mentioned is Ingmar Bergman's Persona, which is one of the greatest, arguably the greatest film ever at capturing intimate close-ups like Denis does in this film. There's, I don't think anyone is going to guess what the fifth reference was. Roadrunner. Roadrunner from the Looney Tunes, and I absolutely because I love cartoons. I am a huge fan of cartoons, and whenever I need to kind of like decompress from like the complexities of like all the films I watch or I'm studying or I'm trying to make or whatever, and just kind of want to retrain my brain back to like thinking simpler and just the beautiful simplicity of moving images. I like to watch cartoons. Like I'm still a big fan of them, and I love to see that someone as as intelligent and accomplished as Denis Villeneuve is using Roadrunner as one of his five golden references for a film of this scale. And I just love it because I love Roadrunner too. It's one of my favorite cartoons. And I think you really see it once he said that, and I rewatched the film just with the speed of this movie. And Denis, this is what one thing I really love about the Star Wars original trilogy is that especially Return of the Jedi, which I think is an underrated film. I think in the direction of that film, George Lucas has such a mastery of scene and motion speed and the speed that everything in the frame moves at. And Denis, I think, really brings that to this film with such a mastery of motion and like I talked about, those having two motions move at the same time, like the one in the crawler scene. Another example would be when before the resurrection, when uh, Jessica uses the voice on Chani, and the camera's moving in as she's like leaning back, and just those kind of clashing movements. And it's just the mastery of like the motion speeds. Like another quick example would be when uh, I think Paul is about to enter the Emperor's room on Arrakis, and we have that shot. The Baron's dying, and Austin Butler looks at him. We focus Paul to Austin Butler at a closer distance. He's just walking into the shadow. Just that slower motion speed he's moving at creates a certain energy to the scene. And I think Denis, just the way he uses the speed in which things move, like I talked about with that juxtaposition of loud and quiet, he also has this great juxtaposition of fast speeds, mid speeds, and slow speeds to such a great degree. And he really puts a lot of emphasis on the way the film actually moves and the speed in which it moves. And, his action as well, just overall, is some of the best action we've seen. It's not just shaky cam action. This is real fight choreography, lots of hand to hand like combat. Stuff like, seeing things from ground level, the video game scopes, and just getting us into the action right away. And yeah, there's so many things that Denis brings to his direction that he does an incredible job of. But I'll pass it off to Ryan.
Yeah, just I, I again, like I've not read the book fully, so like I wasn't really aware of a lot of the big changes he made from the film, so that it wasn't going to bother me. A lot of them, I think, probably made from the best, just from what I've heard. Um, I don't know if have you heard what the differences between the book and the movie are, Alex?
A couple of them, like I listened to Raiders' episode, and I know they went over a couple. Like I know about the difference the baby. I saw what the baby looked like in the Lynch version. It sounds like that decision was for the best. I know that Shani was apparently more like Raiders were saying that in the book she's much more like supportive of Paul rather than in like opposition of him at times. So I really like that change. If it's I don't know what exactly what it's like, but I like that Shani is more like has a lot of questions and doubts about him. I think it makes for a lot of better conflict and just a more fleshed out character. But that's really all I know.
Yeah, I think a lot of the characters, especially the side characters, were a lot better. Obviously, in the first one because they just had a lot more screen time. Stilgar was he was pretty much a completely different character from the first one. We don't really get much insight into him. He's kind of the
I just said way
sorry, what did you
different.
say?
No, I just said he's way different, honestly.
Yeah, he's kind of the comic relief of the film, which a lot of it works for me. There's moments that I don't love. There's that scene when he's sending Paul out into the desert. I don't know. There's a lot of coverage in this scene for some reason. There's a lot of cuts, and I don't. And there's a cut and like he like screams like scare him,
Yeah.
and like I did get a lot of laughs, but I just don't. I don't really love that moment.
Mm.
And I think it's pretty funny like throughout it, and Javier Bardem does a brilliant job of portraying him because it's he's very limited in the first one, and he's a very strict leader from what we see, and he's just completely different from this one, and it works so perfectly into kind of like showing like how scary the kind of controlling of the like through the religion those kind of themes because Stilgar, well, Zendaya or Chani mentions that he's from the south, so he's more like easily influenced about believing the kind of like Lisa and Algabe like coming to save them. So it's funny at first because he just kind of like agrees or like says it's as written like anytime Paul does anything, but there's a point where it becomes like scary because of how like brainwashed he is, and like
Mm.
especially in that moment when Paul stands in front of everybody and like gets everybody on his side, is it's a very moment where you're just like, yeah, this isn't the funny like thing I thought it was at first. There's that one moment in the fight after Paul wins it, and just instantly Stilgar goes, "Listen, Algabe," and I'm just like,
As soon as it's
it's
over, he's
not.
like, "Listen, I'll give," and
Yeah,
that's it.
I, I don't like how they just ran through in comic relief like instantly into this like
I agree.
tense
Yeah, I
moment.
agree. Well,
But I did like most of it. I think it worked, especially in the first half. Zendaya was great. I think she perfectly worked in this role. I know some people were saying the love story doesn't work perfectly, but I did really believe in like her and Paul. What other characters? Austin Butler, maybe a bit overhyped. I don't think he's like the best villain ever. He's not exactly deep. He's just
He needs
kind of
more
that
screen
kind of
time.
psychopath. Yeah, exactly.
With what he
People
had,
comparing him
he
to
did very,
Joker.
very well.
Yeah, he is very Joker like in that arena scene. Like he enjoys the
Mm.
pain, just even the thought of like getting stabbed. He's like enjoying it. And I
Mm.
really love that scene when he gets tested. It's like when Leo Seydoux is like reporting back to the Bene Gesserits, and she's saying like
Oh
he like
yeah,
enjoyed the pain of it.
he's
I
sexually
really like that
vulnerable.
side of character. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah,
that kind of
I did think he was good.
that kind of opening, like the very, very first time we see him, we get that shot from him behind. He's like stretching his neck back like this. It kind of like reminded me of Voldemort a bit, just because like, obviously the way
Oh
he
yeah.
looks. But
Uh,
I love his introduction. I think just the way he controls his character and way he carries himself with like his eyes as well. I thought he just did such a good job of bringing that character to life. I just wish we'd seen a bit more of him because in the book he's there from right at the beginning of the book. He's like when you see him part one with like the sequences with um uh, Raven and Baron, he's there as well. So that was kind of an interesting thing, like to leave him out of those sequences, but also like we don't see him until like halfway into this film as well. Um, yeah, like I said, I would like to see a bit more from him, but what we saw, I just absolutely loved him. Just every chance he could, just slit somebody's throat, stab somebody. I thought that was really, really good. He's very commanding, and just like the clips you see of him at like the end, the way, like the reactions to things in the kind of the final fight, the way he like mimics Paul with like my knife, chip and shatter. Um,
yeah, it's so good.
that's brilliant. But yeah, he was kind of like the standout for like the new characters for me. Um, definitely by like a good margin. Florence Pugh, I thought did really, really well, and I know um With Florence Pugh and Anya Taylor-Joy, of course, who had like one scene. Like, this is like the thing that like Denis promised them. That the same with Zendaya. Like, you're gonna have a really small part in this one, but in the next one, you're gonna be one of the main characters, and that's happening with the both of them. But with the like limited screen time that they had, well, with Florence Pugh had, I thought she did really, really well. I think she fits that role perfectly, and I'm very excited to see what Anya Taylor-Joy can do with Aaliyah, because she is a very, very interesting character going into Dune Messiah. But yeah, I hope Denis sticks to the source material as much as possible with that one, to be honest.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Austin Butler, for me, I think it's gonna take a lot for me to pick someone else to deserve Best Supporting Actor this year over Austin Butler. I think he is proving himself to be one of the best young actors up and coming off of Elvis and then doing this, where if I didn't tell you that and you didn't know, like, you would never think this is the same guy. And he is fully consumed in the role at all times. You never like, you believe that he is fully consumed in this role at all times. Nothing feels forced. It never feels like he's reading a line or trying to force anything. Like, his reactions really do feel natural and subtle, and he gets so many great reaction shots. Like when the Baron dies, and he just has his jaw dropped like a little
He
bit, not like
enjoys it.
it's like almost
It's
like
so funny.
there's no like sense of upset. Like even after, it's like that shot I talked about where he walks over and he looks back. Like he has no sense. It's like, all right, like on to the next one. Like there's no sense of any form of emotion about it. And yeah, he just is fully consumed at all time. I think his introduction is so great in how you just see the fear in everyone around him. Like, aside from what he's doing, like licking the blade like a sicko and stuff like that, like just the way everyone around him is terrified, and he just is just like slitting people's throat in the most casual way. And it's like you just never know what he's going to do next, and they build that character up so great. Obviously, we've talked about the Coliseum scene and how great that is, but also just is aside from those great reaction shots, now his eyes are fully consumed in this character at all times. His body acting also does such a great job. Just the way with his shoulders he walks out to the arena is just very like creates like a certain revealing of his character and like defining character. It really lets you know a lot about who this character is. When the Baron challenges him, like I love how there's that like extreme distance between them, but there's still this communication with these intimate close-ups, despite them being like dots in comparison to each other from the distance. And it's like when he realizes the challenge, like he reacts to it, like he puts his arms up and just embraces it. And just the way with his body, he does so much body acting to reveal, like, let you know who this character is. And I think one of the best decisions that he made in this film is how he doesn't do the cross cutting thing. And he just immerses you in the worlds one at a time, where he builds up the love sequence with Paul and Shawnee without any like real talk of the Harkonnens. Like they're taking out crawlers and stuff, and like a few moments with Dave Bautista, but mostly it's very isolated from into just the Fremen world. And then he just gives, even though like Austin Butler has limited screen time, he has such a strong impact because he gets to be the star for like 10 minutes of the movie. Like he is the star. Like it's not cross cutting with him and Paul, and he's like the villain we're catching up with on the side. Like he gets to fully take the spotlight for his own like chapter of the movie, you can call it. And I think that's one of the best decisions Denis made. And that whole chapter of his introduction works so perfectly. And had they introduced him in part one as like a side character under Dave Bautista, who eventually rose up, I don't know if that's what he is in the book, but I'm just assuming. But it just having to share his introduction with those other characters in the first film, you would have lost the intensity of how they introduced his character in this one, which I think is one of the biggest strengths of this film. And then like the way he even just that slow motion silhouetted walk off after the arena scene is just
He looks like an elf. His ears look like they're pointed.
he just looks like a fuck. I don't even know because I remember both of you were like, because I didn't watch a single trailer, any promotion, anything, and both of you asked me like, did you see what Austin Butler looks like in the film? And I was like, no. And I think it's to a point where I'm like, we got to be like close to the midpoint of this film. Like, is Austin Butler in this thing? And then eventually he shows up and gets like his own chapter, and I see why. And as for the other big character, Florence Pugh, like Florence Pugh is one of the best actresses of our time. Like she is truly like she's already established herself, but she's one of the most talented performers working in this craft today. And I one of my favorite things about her, because I watched on Saturday, I saw Oppenheimer and Dune 2 in the same day. And she like, I'm a big believer in great supporting characters, like, take the right role rather than the biggest role, and I don't think there's anyone who commits that more than Florence Pugh. She has no problem taking limited screen time and leaving a huge impact in that limited screen time she has, rather than just having the star-driven ego thing of, "I need the most screen time, I need the close-ups." Like, she doesn't take the Norma Desmond approach of, like, just constantly wanting the spotlight. Like, she
When
did Timer was up.
when Denis offered her the role, he was like, "Oh, you're not going to be much in this one, but in the next one she will be." And she was like, "I just want to see you work."
Yeah, it's what
Yeah.
Nolan said to her as well, wasn't it? She just wants to work with
Mm.
great directors, which is good.
Mm.
And you see it, like, look who she's worked with. Like, just look at the resume. It's and she's a part of some of the films that are gonna be remembered through history. Like, there's a lot of great performances from actors, a lot of great leading performances that are wasted in films that unfortunately probably will be forgotten in history. I'm not gonna say any names to them, but, like, there are great performances in films that are gonna kinda get lost throughout time. But the works of Denis Villeneuve, Chris Nolan, Ari Aster, like these are films that are going to live on through history, and the fact that Florence Pugh is a part of them is going to do a lot of great things for her legacy. And I think honestly, on a rewatch, she should have got a Best Supporting Actress nom for Oppenheimer. Like her screen presence is so powerful in that film, and I think that honestly, like I think Emily Blunt deserves to be there too. I think there should have been two nominations in that category from Oppenheimer. And Denis also in the end gives her such a frame filling type close up. Like most of them get like their whole heads in the frame, but her it's like just the landscape of her face, almost like a Sergio Leone western. And you see that her facial expressions on such an intimate level in that one shot, more so than a lot of the other characters, which kind of just gives her character a different feeling from the rest of them. And I know both of you talked about Stilgar, played by Javier Bardem. I agree, is like a totally different character. So I only have three criticisms of this film. One, it should be longer. Two, the music, and then I have the minor criticism of some of his performance moments, where like sometimes he doesn't feel like that strong leader of the first one. Like he doesn't feel like a strong leader, and at the same time, like obviously we know that Paul is not the Messiah that they make him out to be. And we know that Chani doesn't believe in him, but we need to feel like Javier Bardem believes in him. Like, we need to feel the belief in his character. I feel like should be persuading us to believe in Paul. And like the one scene where he's like, "Oh, he's too humble." Like he plays it in such a comedic way, and it gets a bunch of laughs. Where it's almost like we're laughing at how ridiculous he sounds, rather than actually feeling him believe in it. Like we should, if this character believes he's the Messiah, he should feel like he really believes that he's the Messiah, where it feels like he's more making a joke out of it and how ridiculous it sounds. So I just didn't feel like. But then we get to like the scene, and like I don't think he gave a bad performance by any means. That scene at the where Paul gives the big speech, the big monologue, like in that scene, we feel the belief. So I do think there was a little bit of inconsistency. Like the scene with the sandworm, I thought like the comedic beats worked good a lot of the time there, not all of them, but I do think there were some moments, only a few, where like you just don't feel the belief in him. But overall, I think that he still gives a very good performance. Like I don't want to be like people to think I don't think he did a good job, because he absolutely did. But those were just a couple minor things that I didn't think worked as good. But I'll pass it off to Ryan.
Yeah, another one we've not talked about is kind of the Baron, because he's kind of got a more supporting role in this one. He was kind of the big bad guy in the first one, so he had a lot more screen time. But I did like how Oscar Isaac's like attack on him kind of stayed with him throughout. I kind of thought he would maybe be forgotten a bit about that because he kind of heals in those black pools or whatever they're called, but he's got that like floating ball thing that's keeping him almost alive. So there's always that like kind of stays with him that he's been attacked, and I think obviously probably does lead to him being very vulnerable at the end and him dying. I really like the when Paul stabs him, and then there's that close up into his ring with a shield, like we see in the first one, and he's like almost presses it. I really like that moment. But yeah, there's just he's not in a whole ton like the first
Mm.
one. I really like Christopher Walken as well. He doesn't get a whole ton to do, but it's Christopher Walken, so he's definitely cool to see in a film. He's maybe not exactly what I expected because at least seeing when I watched part one for the first time, I maybe expected a more like intimidating character, like someone above the Baron. Because I had no idea who even the Emperor was, so it's not who I expected. But I still really enjoyed his role in the film. Going back to Anya Taylor-Joy as well, Alex, you didn't get it spoiled. We got it spoiled on Twitter 2 weeks ago before it that she was in the film. So, what was your reaction just seeing her like pop up randomly?
Well, I can tell you my reaction to you telling me that is another reason I'm so thankful. One that I'm thankful I don't watch trailers for a number of reasons. I watch them after, and I'm like, yeah, good thing I don't watch the trailer. But I always, every time anyone tells me anything on Twitter ever, if I hear literally anything about Twitter, pretty much it always results in me being thankful I'm not on that shit. So
She showed up to the London premiere, and then they started asking Denis, "How did you like keep this secret so well?" It's like you did not keep the secret. If you're showing it at the London premiere 2 weeks ago, you did not keep the secret.
Her voice in the trailer, and I knew it. That last trailer, her voice plays over the end of it, and no one believed it. Everyone thought it was Rebecca Ferguson, and I was trying to tell everyone that does not sound like Rebecca Ferguson. And I couldn't pinpoint who it was.
She's got the witch ASMR voice on when she's speaking.
Yeah, but yeah, she's got such a pivotal role, kind of going forward into the last kind of film, Messiah, hopefully, which hasn't been greenlit yet, but Denis almost finished the script for it. I don't think it'll be his next film, but I'm very happy that he picked Anya for that role because it's a pretty big role and she's an incredible actress.
And anyone
I didn't think it would be his next film, but like I watched the podcast with him on. I can forget the name again, but it did almost sound like he was maybe going to make it as his next film, possibly.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm not really sure though.
Pressure. I'm like, there's a lot of people who don't want to wait. Like people are saying, like we're gonna have to wait like 2-3 years for it. I was like, dude, be ready to wait like 5. Like, yeah, you don't know when he's gonna make this film. Like, we might wait 5 years for it, but I do think that there's gonna be pressure for it to be his next film. But
I think
take 4 years to work on.
He's gonna need to age the actors a bit if it is his next film because a 12-year time jump is interesting.
Timothée aged a lot between the first one and part 2. I've seen a lot of people talk about
that. But 12 years is definitely something. What was I going to say? Lost my train of thought then. I don't know what I was going to say then.
But anyone who wants to say Denis Villeneuve's a bad director, look at the actors who want to work with him. Like literally, like so many of the most talented actors are wanting to be a part of this project, and it's not just because, like, you could say, okay, then is Marvel like the best movies ever? Marvel's putting the paychecks out. Is Denis putting out the paychecks? Probably, but look at it's just it's these people really do want to work with Denis Villeneuve. Like him and like Christopher Nolan with Oppenheimer, like people want to be a part of these projects and are willing to take low screen time and not just show up and read their lines and go home as a quick paycheck. Like they're really like putting effort into these characters, even if they don't necessarily have the most screen time necessarily. There's a lot about him as a director.
I'm kind of sad because Stephen McKinley's character Fluffy was completely cut from this, and so was Tim Blake Nelson was also meant to be in the film. He was cut from it. His scenes were cut, which makes because he said the reason of the cut because they thought it was too long. That just makes me even madder because I wanted to see them in the film and I like Fluffy as character. And he just kind of disappears, but he has like a small part in the second half of the book. But yeah, I'm really interested to see what role Tim Blake Nelson played. But I'm sad that they were cut.
Oh, we wouldn't see it.
I know, because Denis never releases deleted scenes.
Yeah, we've been praising Denis this whole episode. Time to criticize him. Denis, put the fucking deleted scenes on the DVD.
Give us an extended cut, man. You've said you've cut them because you wanted to be too long, but it's too short.
It's too short. Like everyone's saying it's too short. Like you're talking about too long. Like what do you make it 3.5 hours? You're
Exactly.
Denis Villeneuve. You can make a 3-hour movie. Like people cut them because they have to. You were allowed to.
Yeah, and recently we have like so many people like planning director's cuts as well. Like it's
I
not like
know.
exactly like an out there
Zack
thing.
Snyder's a fraud, man. Ridley Scott as well. Ridley Scott is actually I feel sorry because obviously a bit of studio interference. He's a great filmmaker. But yeah, are we even going to get the Napoleon 4-hour cut? 'Cause we've had nothing
I don't
since
think
it's
so.
released about
I
that.
don't even want that badly.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, the idea of like purposely sabotaging your film and then releasing a director's cut afterwards is the stupidest thing ever. But sometimes your studio interference does put you in that situation, which sucks.
Yeah.
Which doesn't
That's what
seem
makes
like
it
it
even
is
weirder
here.
because Denis definitely would have had final cut on this. So
Oh
it's
yeah, he definitely does have final cut
why
on this.
why delete these scenes? It just doesn't make sense.
I mean, I
Yeah,
think he was worried about the pacing. I think that's what it entirely.
Yeah, probably.
yeah.
Mhm.
The film went by really quickly, but it needs to be longer, man.
I agree. But moving back to the characters, I said that Austin Butler would take a lot for me to pick someone else as my own choice for best supporting actor over him. And the same goes for the best supporting actress category because Rebecca Ferguson should have in the bag. Her screen time is significantly less than this one, and she makes the most of that in every way possible. Like, I'm going back and forth between which of them two I think is the best performance. I'm definitely leaning towards Rebecca Ferguson, and she becomes, and even in the beginning, it's not like she just shows up in this movie and plays a new character. In the beginning, she very much feels like the Lady Jessica of Dune 1. And then once she drinks that poison, she is a new character. There is an intensity in those eyes and like just an authority to them that, she just embodies so perfectly, like Austin Butler. She is consumed in that role fully. And the thing that she does so subtly, I think better than any actor in this film, is a lot of the times when Rebecca Ferguson gets her close ups, she just tilts her head in the slightest of ways. She does this multiple times. She does it when what's it called? She does it multiple times with the resurrection scene. If you look at her reactions there, she reacts to things just by like tilting her head in one direction so slightly, but it reveals so much about what she's thinking in that moment or what she wants someone else to do. Like right after, like she then after Paul resurrects, there's like her eyes are like popping out more and she just tilts her head back a bit. But before when she wants Chani to like resurrect Paul, she just tilts her head down like a little more. And there's also like she doesn't move her face at all when after Paul well so after Paul wins the no, sorry, I'm mixing things up. She doesn't move her face at all when Paul uses the voice on the High Benny Gesserit lady, but you can see like the sense of like not repressed happiness, but like you can tell in her face that she is happy. She's like, "Yup, like that's what you get after that." Like you can tell she is not at all upset that Paul just used the voice on her, and she definitely tactically wants Paul to be the Messiah so that she can, I think, overtake as like the High Benny Gesserit lady. But after even though like she becomes very like heartless and emotionless, that's the other thing. It's such an effective performance, even though like it's not like an emotional performance like we normally think of with great performances. But we really see that some emotion did survive after Paul's win when we think he gets stabbed and we think he might lose. Where it's like she's been holding this breath for a long time, and you see her release it. She's like, and just the release of that breath is just such a small thing, but really lets us know that she still does have that motherly emotion and was nervous about the possibility of Paul losing. It's the smallest of things that she does for the biggest of impacts. And she has so many just intense stares, like when she's staring and talking to the baby version of Anya
Reverend
Taylor.
Mother. Oh no.
No, no, the when she's talking and she's just like talking about the ones who don't believe in Paul in the voiceover.
Yeah.
It comes right after like one of the romance scenes. We go from like the romantic score to like the menacing score, just the stare. or like when she's talking to Paul shortly after, and it's a slight high angle on her, and she's almost like a snake, like the way her face is like snapping at Paul in one of the earlier scenes after she drinks the poison. And there's just so many of the subtlest nuances to her performances, and so many of them are just with those small head tilts that are just even more effective than dialogue would be. And I think her performance. Oh, also when she's actually getting poisoned, just like the lean forward with like her shoulders like above the head, like the angle of her body feels so unnatural as she's being poisoned that it just the effect it creates. And it's subtle. It's really going to take a lot for me to think another supporting actress role is better than this year, because I hope the sci-fi bias does not stop her from getting the Oscar this year, because she
It
just
will.
knocked it out of the park. It probably will with a lot of things, especially performance categories, but I think there's a deserving winner in all four performance categories in this film with Austin Butler, Rebecca Ferguson, and then of course the two leads, Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya. But I'm sure both of you have plenty of praise to give to Rebecca Ferguson because she just knocks it out of the park.
Yeah, like, everything you said is exactly right. I think maybe there will be not just a sci-fi bias. I think there's maybe a bias just in general about big blockbusters. Like
It's
even when Return of the King like swept in the Oscars, like I don't think any of the actors or supporting actors, I don't think any of them even got nominations. So that could happen again possibly. I think Timothy as well. I think he should be up there. I think he's maybe my favorite performance in the movie because, like Rebecca Ferguson, he is playing two different characters. Maybe a bit more than her because he does. He is his kind of normal Paul self for at least more than half the film before he makes that big switch, and he is so intimidating once he does that. Like that scene in the middle of the pit, and down south in front of the framing is like he's really intimidating. Like people probably wouldn't have expected Timothée Chalamet to be able to do that. Like he's a small, like skinny kid, and a lot of that is like I don't know if Dune Part One Timothée could have done that. Like just look wise, he just didn't really have that like build or anything. But I think those like 2 years to age have really gave him maybe a bit more screen presence, physically. Like kind of fits the look wise a bit more. The fact that he was able to like make Batista scared and unbelievable like throughout the film says a lot about his performance. Um, yeah, just kind of the idea of his character just kind of spreads throughout the film. Definitely creating a more intimidating character. So yeah, I think he's probably my favorite performance in the film. I don't know if it'd be interesting to see if people are actually getting nominations coming Oscar season because there is that bias, but it's not going to be a strong year, I don't think. So there might be stuff that come out of nowhere, but there might not be that many like Oscar nomination or big Oscar actor nominations in general. So they might slip in anyway. But yeah, I'd really love to see a couple of them get in there.
Yeah, we're getting a Yorgos film this year though, so just with the way he directs film, there'll be a threat in performance categories across the board. So
True. You got anything to add about the performances, Oscar?
I just love the whole ensemble. Really, I think Rebecca Ferguson is probably my favorite casting out of any casting this decade. Honestly, just because of how perfect it is from translation to the book. I don't think anyone's going to get nominated for any performances, honestly, and that's not me doubting their performances because I absolutely love all of them. I just don't see it, honestly, with the way the Academy goes and just yeah, I know it's
Yeah, it just
looking
tends to
like
be
a
what they do
shallow
then.
year.
Yeah, it's more that indie films get acting, and then they'll give the technical awards to stuff like Dune. So I think that's probably what will happen.
yeah,
Yeah, that is true.
I heard it too. The fact that there's a third film coming out, it could get the treatment of like,
Yeah, exactly.
where's the third
Yeah.
film?
If
Like,
Timmy's going to get an award for any of the films, it's definitely going to be in Messiah.
yeah, it's just what I'm worried about. Although it's like I look at what's coming out this year, it's like aside from Coppola, if he pulls that off, it's like who really is going to take this Best Director from? But you never know. We're insanely early in the year where we haven't even had last
Mm,
year's awards, so it's way too early to really know what the competition's going to
Yeah,
be. But
there'll
like
be
I said,
stuff that we've never even heard of right now that'll come out of nowhere.
yeah, true.
100%. And that's I think the big winner of this year's Oscars is likely going to be something we haven't seen yet, but just
Mm,
because of the sci-fi bias, this is probably going to still rank at the top for most of mine. But I think, also like I got it. Zendaya has really come a long way in her career. Like the first movie I saw her in was Spider-Man: Homecoming, where I was not crazy about her performance. And then by the time she got to Spider-Man: No Way Home, I'm like, she like really does have like more emotional range than I realized at first. And I think by this film, Denis gives her, I think, the ultimate show of like actors talk about like screen time and like, oh, like how many lines does this actor have? In my opinion, it's the wrong way to look at it completely. Like, I don't think lines have anything to do with the value of the performance or how big it is. And Denis, I think, agrees with that too, because the way he gives actresses like Rebecca Ferguson and Zendaya not the most lines, but the amount of close-ups he gives them and the amount of reaction shots. So we see Zendaya react to pretty much everything. Like almost everything that happens in the film, we see a reaction shot of Zendaya. And she needs to carry so many reaction shots where she's not speaking and just needs to use her face to communicate the character's emotion. And we see such a range of them throughout the film, ultimately building up to that final, just such insanely intense built up emotions with this complete mixed feelings in that final shot. I think she just does such a great job. And I think the relationship is so interesting because it's so difficult for Paul to earn her trust. And it's like, even when it's like we know they've been like sleeping together for months and still doesn't trust him, it takes so much to earn that trust and he still betrays it. And just the way she reacts to that is gotta be so difficult to, like, really feel that betrayal, but in her face, you can really see the betrayal mixed with that epic Hans Zimmer score, and I think Zendaya really did. I think she's someone I could easily see getting snubbed by the Academy because she's younger and it's a blockbuster and it's a sci-fi movie, like, I could see her getting snubbed, but I think she really did, like, up her game, and she's come a very long way as an actress and gave, definitely the best performance I've seen her in here, so that's another one who I thought,
Yeah, I think her best work is on Euphoria. Definitely, you've not seen that. But yeah, I mean, there's actors like Sydney Sweeney and Jacob Elordi in that, and she completely carries that show acting wise. I think it's definitely better here, but this is kind of her big kind of movie star breakout into more serious roles, I guess. She's been in blockbusters like Spider-Man, like you said, but this is a more serious role, so it's definitely her big movie role. Yeah, I don't know if I'd give her an acting nomination, but I think she did the character really well, and I think she's done a good job.
Yeah, I think both Chalamet and Zendaya were already two of the biggest young stars, and I think they're even bigger stars now to the point where, like, I think, like, in 5 years, people are gonna know them from Dune. It's like, it's gonna put them on the map. Like, I know, like, that show Euphoria was big. I know a lot of people already know Timothée Chalamet, but I think this film is gonna have such a cultural impact to make them even bigger stars than they already were. So I really think this is, like, I know it's kinda hard to say because 'cause they're already two of the biggest, but I think, like, this is really gonna be a star-defining film for both of them for years to come.
Yeah, Timothy has an insane filmography now. Like, just the amount of performances just from the past couple of years is insane.
He's the young Leo. He's literally the young Leo. He's like the good looking, like kind of like softer guy of like the heartthrob type of actor, like longer hair, like Leo was in Titanic, and then he's like doing all like serious roles, picking the right directors, and then he's gonna develop into like Leo. And I think on the other end, Austin Butler is the young Christian Bale, like someone who just goes crazy method and becomes unrecognizable in every role.
Yeah, this has really changed my opinion of Austin Butler because I didn't really like him coming out of Elvis. Kind of annoyed me. I
I
didn't. Elvis was alright, but um, yeah, his method acting kind of annoyed me at that point. But this has really changed my opinion of
He's great in the
him in
Bike
general.
Riders. I really liked him in that, which is coming out in June.
Yeah, a couple actually things about Denis filmmaking, just miscellaneous. I do want to mention is the way he's able to change the lighting of the action with those sand clouds. Like in the final fight, I guess you could say, with Dave Bautista before Austin Butler's introduced, where it's like it's this brighter scene. It's like then there's the big sand cloud, and it's like this darker scene, and then as the ornithopter flies up, it changes into like a brighter lighting. And just the way he uses those sand clouds to like change the lighting. He does it also with that epic shot where the worm comes out with like this empty frame, great anticipation. The worm just comes in with that roar and fills the frame vertically. He does that. He in this film has one of the smoothest scene transitions I've ever seen in my life. That's so
Is it
just
when
so
it fades to dark around Jessica? That's
exactly
so good.
Oh
when he
yeah, it's so
the
good.
right before the Harkonnen reveal, when it's like you're seeing everyone's reaction, and she just closes her eyes. Then as she closes them, it dims, and then it's so smooth. And now it's one of the smoothest scene transitions I've ever seen. And honestly, I don't really see anyone talking about it. And then also, I love that the way they introduced Lady Margot, where like first we're in that scope, like binocular shot, like moving around the arena, setting the stage for the atmosphere. And then we cut back to the distance and then we cut to her. Like I thought that was just such a great introduction. I also love with her the way they kind of create like an insider moment for the audience where like we know something that the characters don't, where it's like there's that in the end of the seduction, there's like it's like first we see the box and it's like, oh, like Austin Butler doesn't know what he's about to be in for, but we know. So it creates like a moment where we're an insider and knows something the character doesn't, and then there's just a slide into the needle, and it's just like
I
it's
was
just
just about to say he uses the exact same shot of the sliding into the needle as the first. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, it's the exact same thing. I was like, because I really like
Oh,
that shot from the
yeah.
first one.
oh, it's great.
About another thing from the first one, remember when he likes to use like non-linear like editing when
Mm.
Leah when they're talking in the corridor and like it's very close ups into um is it Lady Margaret? Is that what her called? Margot?
Yeah, let they do.
Uh, oh yeah. When it's in their face and they kind of teleport to her room without you really like noticing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Because they're in the corridor, and then Feud makes like the remark that like he doesn't even know where he is. So I
Mm.
think yeah, so I just feel like that like kind of sounded like the Bene Gesserit kind of like manipulating him and like almost teleporting him about like, he doesn't even know what's happening.
The score
Mm.
totally is too on that reveal. It's like a totally the mood just flips so subtly, and it was in real tight, so you don't even notice. I agree.
Mhm.
That whole sequence is just great.
Mm.
He also, I love the Gurney intro too, where it's like we hear the familiar first that sound, just the creak. It's like such like a creaky sound to that crawler he's on. Like it's not like a industrial like fresh military one. Like it's this old creaky one, just the sound. And then we hear the familiar voice because I didn't see the trailer, but I knew that they didn't show Gurney die in the first one. So I'm like, that he's got to be alive. And we're like halfway into the film, and I actually did think about it. I'm like, is he dead? I'm like, nah, that motherfucker's still got to be around somewhere.
Mm.
And then they just the way they tilt the light up and the light most people would have the light hit his face where it doesn't like hits his shoulder close enough to light him up that you can kind of see him. I think that was such a great reveal. Then he also loves to have he does it in Blade Runner too. He loves to have like an obstruction or smoke and have someone like or a shadow and become visible walking up out of it. Like he does that with in the scene with Dave Bautista where he's like, show yourself, like the worm he does it. But he loves having things come up out of like obstruction. And another really small one that filmmaking thing that he does is when Lady Jessica's saying to go find Chani when Paul's drank the poison. She says finds her with the voice and it starts panning, but like right when the camera starts panning, it like jump cuts ahead. And it's like a real like subtle jolt. It's like that's not something I really see people ever do. It's subtle, but I thought it created such a sharp, kind of jarring effect for that moment, which is perfect. And he also draws the eye really well in that scene where he gives the speech to the one guy Paul tests in the crowd. He doesn't use like brightness or color to draw the eye, but if you look, everyone in the crowd is like very tightly together, where there's just a little bit more space between that guy and everything else, and he's center frame, which is why like we look at him and just know what he's thinking before Paul calls it out. We know it a moment before. So the way he's able to kind of just draw your eye and put that idea in your head a moment before, I thought is just another brilliant moment from him. But I mean, we could sit here all day and talk about the brilliance of Denis Villeneuve with this film because it's unreal. But do you guys have anything to add before we move into the superlatives?
No, I don't think so.
No.
Does anyone want to start us off? Because I need to figure out.
It's difficult. We'll start with favorite moment because I think that's easy for me. Definitely the Hawk. Just anything on Gady Prime. That whole sequence with the
Yeah.
thermal thing up until we kind of cut back. Just just perfect sequence for me. Characters, score, cinematography, lighting is just absolutely perfect. Definitely my favorite moment.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same. Maybe in particular, like the corridor scene with Lady Margot and Feud just because I liked how Denis got a bit weird, in particular where like just the like these scenes. So I just kind of like those scenes more. Um, and probably the final fight, like the hand to hand fight at the end, just how there was no music. It's just them brawling it out. I think that was, and it's like it's stupid to think on like when you actually think of it, looking back on it. But like I genuinely like was worried about like Paul dying in that moment, like just in the moment of watching it, just because I like didn't know what was gonna happen.
I didn't know.
Um,
I thought he might have died. Like I'm like, is this the third book going a different? I'm like, I know it's the end of this book, so does the
yeah,
third book go follow someone else? Like I don't know, follow his sister. I thought he might have died.
yeah, there is that like tension, like even though like when you think back on it, like of course he
He's
does
not
die,
done
but
yet. Trust me.
yeah. But yeah, that's definitely probably my two favorite moments.
Alex, what about you? Favorite moment?
I mean, I got like so many. I guess I have to go with the Coliseum. Like it's the moment like on a rewatch I get the most excited for. It's got to be the
Same.
Coliseum.
Yeah,
I
just so
love like the
unique.
hallway seduction too, and yeah, or the worm riding's great too. The crawler attack is very close actually. The crawler attack
Mm,
is very close.
Yeah, the sandworm riding scene, and then the when the
mm,
sandworms come in, the three of them come in at the end in the big fight.
mm,
Um, Also, I like when they go south, and you see like the overhead shot of them going into the storm.
mm,
It's just Jessica going by herself. I really like that scene as well.
mm. Um, top five shots. Top five
Favorite
shots. This
song,
is tricky.
Reading.
So right off the bat for me, the that shot that I've mentioned before, Lady Jessica bashing that guy's rock overhead in the opening, and we get kind of
Yeah,
the top of the dune on the middle of the frame, going across horizontally. We got the clips in the top right and their silhouettes at the top. One of my favorite shots of the film, definitely. That one wide shot of the Colosseum that was in the trailer that's been passed around a lot, absolutely in there as well. Um, the shot of the three worms coming in, definite standout for me. The and probably also that I don't know which one take the harvester one or the one with Charlie going into battle. I think both are brilliant. For fourth one, I think I'll go for that shot of the harvester, not the harvester, ornithopter crashing down in the background and Charlie's running across to pull in that harvester attack scene. I absolutely love that shot. Um, and for my final one, I think it's got to be the shot of the bird's eye shot of just all the people on the heads and Paul's walking through the crowd. Absolutely has to be there for
yeah,
me.
yeah. That's a lot of my favorites as well. Ones you didn't mention, I'll go for the overhead shot of him running across the sand dune when he's running towards the worm.
Oh yeah.
The shot of the Emperor's ship like entering the atmosphere and it's like going on fire.
Mm,
Um, I think yeah, probably one of the other ones at the start when it's like the really like orange lighting. Maybe when they like when they first jump into the air and with like the zero gravity. Um, the Emperor's throne definitely. That like the like beam of light going down the middle is ridiculously good. And seeing that the behind the scenes shots, so that makes it even better. The fact that they're still creating these like ridiculous like sets. Um, and then yeah, and then the one you mentioned, the three sandworms coming through, and then I think probably the best one is um the shot of when they're about to fight at the end, and like like the sunsets behind them, and that's probably the
yeah.
best shot. And I know Greg Fraser done a lot of stuff to create like artificial light behind it, and it looks so good. It's almost like what he done with the Batman. I know Denis didn't want him to use the volume on this, so he had to find out different ways to kind of create that lighting. But yeah, it's one of the best looking shots, I think.
Alex?
Well, I'm definitely gonna go see this movie again tonight and watch it and be like, "Wow, I can't believe I forgot this shot, that shot." But the ones that I'm gonna also I do love that shot Oscar mentioned with the Lady Jessica save in the beginning where she smashes the rock, where the guy like comes up out of focus, like in the top of the frame, like it's just like creates like, the moment of like dread before that. That one's great too. It probably should be on my list as well. But a couple honorable mentions, like that walk through the crowd shot where it's just like a tight, long lens. It's like not handheld or shaky or anything, just everyone spreading. It's great. The worm approach, both the shot on the worm, yeah, the one Oscar talked about is so great. The more I think about it too, the more he's on the worm and he's like leaned back and it's from behind. That's great. The one of the worm like approaching up before he rides it. But getting into my top five, we have the first long take of when they pop out, the action long take on in the crawler scene. That one's just awesome for so many reasons. The three like different swaps of like depth, I guess you could say. Like first Johnny's eye, then the scope comes up, and then we focus both of the ornithopter shot. I love that shot. Then we have the of course the floating up shot in the beginning of the Harkonnen soldiers. Just that warm lighting is so perfect. The rolling over the hill shot, where like we kind of roll over the hill at hill level, that's awesome too. He uses it twice. I love both of them. If I have to pick, maybe I guess the warm lighting one, because I love that light so much. But I also love the way it reveals like this grand depth in the later one of the army.
Yeah, the still guard kneeling in front of
Yup.
in front of it. That was such a good shot.
And the hallway fireworks right before the seduction when she's just walking through and there's the lights flashing through that large hallway. Like that's great. And just like also like in that Coliseum sequence before, like just the way their face is like an unnatural white, the way it pops the black and white, like using the actual colors black and white rather than just a color movie without color. Like actually using the colors black and white are great in that. But honestly, if I have to, that was all like out order random. But I think if I had to pick one, it's that shot of the holy water and the reflection and how it just looks like layers and layers of history below. I just think that shot's so beautiful and poetic at the same time. So even though the rest of them are scattered across, I do think that's my favorite shot of the film. But
actually, for me, the one shot where Gurney steps into frame has got that explosion in the background. That scene, that's definitely gonna make my top five. Actually, that's unbelievable shot. It's so good. But yeah, and MVP for everybody.
No question, Greig Fraser.
Greig Fraser, yeah.
It's easily 5 minutes of film. Greig Fraser MVP. Easily.
If we're going for characters, obviously Timothée Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Austin Butler, just because of that one arena scene, gorgeous. But without Greig Fraser in that arena scene, then wouldn't be half as good as it is.
Without Greig Fraser at all, you say the whole movie.
True.
But yeah, performance-wise, I'm going to say Austin Butler and Rebecca Ferguson. On a first watch, I probably would have said Austin Butler. After a couple rewatches, I think I might be leaning Rebecca Ferguson. Ryan, who are your MVPs?
It's so hard because like there's so many great acting performances. But I think I might go Timothée because I don't think there's anybody in his age range or generation that could have delivered this kind of performance of Paul.
Oh yeah,
especially the big switch up. So I'm gonna go him.
What about MVP for the whole film?
Well, Greig Fraser, of course. Yeah. Yeah, I think that.
Honorable mention to Denis and Hans, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've made it clear throughout this entire time our appreciation for all of them. And yeah, we think we've talked a bit about where we think it's going to go at the Oscars, but I really would give it probably like if this was a 2023 release like it should have been, I would be picking it for every award except for maybe best score would be very tough. I'd really have to sit
I'd give editing to Oppenheimer.
You're right. I would give editing to Oppenheimer too.
Definitely.
Editing. I might give it score just because they use it a little more, and that would probably be the deciding factor because they're both perfect scores in my opinion. So it would be insane.
Score to Oppenheimer, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Score to Oppenheimer.
I wouldn't give it Best Picture. That's my thing.
I would personally, but if Oppenheimer another one of the best of the decade, so
yeah, I'd give it to the Zone of Interest if it was still last
It'd
year.
be my number 2 to Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Down the board, though, I think I would give Dune. Personally, I'd give Dune if it was this year, pretty much everything. Like I said, so I'd keep Oppenheimer for editing and score. But
I'm very glad it wasn't though, because they probably would have had the sequel treatment of not giving them probably most of the technical awards because they already gave the first one them.
True.
Oppenheimer probably would have still got the same technical awards.
yeah, which is
that is true.
I don't think Oppenheimer deserved that many technical awards on the way this film does. Whereas, like Oppenheimer, I think is just such a strong script and direction. But I think the technical awards like are good, but not like stand out. Whereas this, I feel like they're like this is a true technical perfection movie. But I think that what's it called? If it was this year, this movie would have got like no performance awards or nominations. I mean, it definitely wouldn't have won anything.
Yeah, for sure.
This year, it definitely wouldn't have been a threat in performance categories. Like maybe Rebecca Ferguson is the only one I would see getting in.
Yeah, supporting actress was.
Any year, I don't see any performance awards. Honestly, I'm going to be really, really brutal. I don't see any performance awards in a year.
Yeah, you are probably right. It would have been the most competitive best score race ever. Like imagine and Oppenheimer going head to head. That would be.
I still think Oppenheimer would take it.
I think so.
And I still think the Oppenheimer score was better than this one.
They're both perfect.
Yeah, not that I necessarily believe it, but it probably would be that like because it's not like a completely original score. Like it's moving on from the first one.
That's that definitely would be a deciding factor too. Yeah, for me, I think that those scores are perfect. It's just the fact that like if I have to pick one, because Oppenheimer takes more of a wall to wall music approach, I'm going to give that the deciding factor of it. But they're both perfect. Like, but yeah, this year I think it's gonna be a much weaker year. It's gonna be a lot less competitive, and I think because of that, this is a chance to kind of overcome the sci-fi bias, but the sequel bias will still be strong. So. But if you made it far into the episode, you have proved that Denis Villeneuve should have made it 3 hours because if you're willing to watch 3 hours of a podcast, then I'm sure you have no problem sitting through 3 hours of a film. So, anyone of any
another episode that's longer than the film.
That shows how great this film is. We could talk about it for longer than the film itself. But anyone have any wrap-up thoughts? So go see Oppenheimer or go see Dune 2 again in IMAX because keep supporting this film. Make sure this wins the box office this year. It'd be a huge win for cinema. Get as many people out to the theater to see it in IMAX because in a couple months you won't ever really be able to see this again in that experience. So you only have a couple months to really experience it in IMAX, and we encourage everyone to take full advantage of that. And make sure this movie gets the financial support it needs. Yes, it's going to make money, but if this really becomes the box office winner of the year, it could lead to a lot of really great films getting made. And I got to be honest, we've had a great big scale film every year the last couple of years. Like we got Oppenheimer, Top Gun Maverick, like Babylon. Like we've gotten some very big scale.
You're forgetting one.
The last few years. I know what I'm forgetting.
I don't think you are.
No big sci-fi blockbuster, no.
Dune Part 1.
Yeah.
That's it. I knew I was forgetting one. I knew two from 2022, and I was like, and one from 23. I'm like, what did I forget from 21?
Yeah, we've definitely been spoiled with like great experiences this decade.
And when you look at the 2010s, like did we really get great big blockbusters? Like, it was the MCU every year. Like we didn't get blockbusters like this in the 2010s.
Yeah.
So I'm a big advocate that the 2020s is already shaping up to be the best film decade of the 21st century. So
yeah, when you look at decades as well, the first couple of years are usually the weakest, and like this is ridiculously strong.
In 2010s for sure. Like 2010 is a stacked year, but then like 11, 12, 13 are pretty weak.
Yeah.
13 had some. Yeah, 2010 was stacked.
2010 was back. But yeah, so like, subscribe, comment, all that, and we'll be back next week with another great episode. We got the Oscars coming up, so we're going to be covering all that. And tune in shortly. Tune in soon if you are a Denis Villeneuve fan, because we have a full Denis Villeneuve filmography episode coming out very soon. We're going to break down the rest of his films, give you our ranking. You can find out where Dune Part 2 ranks for us in all of Denis' filmography. So make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can stay tuned when that comes out. Thank you.